Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp joins the show once again as we kick off our Summer of Blockbuster series with Jaws, Steven Spielberg's classic film. Today we deep dive not only into our views on the film and our history with the film, but also what it meant for the blockbuster genre, before we get into a deeper meditation about the status of the blockbuster in cinema and the evolution over the last 50 years from Jaws to now. This is definitely a little bit of a bigger episode, but it is a good kickoff to set the mood for the Summer of Blockbusters, which will be here on the podcast. Make sure you see those time codes down in the description below if you want to skip to a certain part of the conversation. But for now, let's get to our review of Jaws.
I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chump some of this shit. You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Okay, and before we get into our thoughts on Jaws, let me run through the stats to kick off our Summer of Blockbuster series, in case anyone doesn't know the story of Jaws, as far as the reception to it. Jaws debuted June 20th, 1975, to a bit of an interesting release schedule. So originally it was scheduled to come out in 900 theaters, a huge release for the time, but due to really strong test screenings, they actually scaled that down to only about 450 at first. They wanted to make this an event for the summer. They used a revolutionary television marketing technique, and they really wanted to make this a big deal. So they rolled it out June 20th into only 450 theaters. It got an exceptional word of mouth. Over the summer, they released it into more and more theaters until it climbed back up to that 900 level, and very quickly became a huge success. After 78 days, it defeated The Godfather to become the highest grossing film at the time in North American box office history. It became the first film ever to earn $100 million at the box office. Its initial release brought it to $123.1 million, which is pretty good considering it has a $9 million budget. And then since then, with further re-releases, it has gained $266.5 million domestically and $477.2 million internationally. So a huge success film. Let's get first into just our thoughts on our history with the film. Do we like the film? What is our relationship to Jaws? And Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you first, Mr. Editor-in-Chief, with the no camera again. What are your thoughts on Jaws?
By saying that, if no one can see me, I'm generally quite puzzled to where to start here, because I can't. If I remember rightly, I think I got into this, and this is going to lead me on to your next question when we do part two to this a little bit later. But if I remember, this was like an era where I'd watched like the Harry Potters and I think like Lord of the Rings, and it was like the next thing to watch. It just felt natural to watch it. And then I think I watched the sequels as well.
How old were you? Like about
2009, maybe 2008, maybe 2007. It was like the latter half when the Harry Potter came out, and there was like you couldn't watch anything else. You wanted to watch something a bit more adult, but like as a kid, and you was like, oh, Jaws will be the one to watch. I don't ever remember having it on video. That's like a cassette player for those who are a bit older than, a bit younger than myself, But I remember having this on DVD, and I remember watching it every summer, especially when like I was at my grandparents' house. But I've never had a really specific relationship with this film. I've always really enjoyed it, and I've always loved it. But I've never sort of had this as my favourite film. It's never been my favourite film. I think this would be... I remember a few years ago we did our top... Is it a top 100 or top 250? I would be hard-pressed to even... Yeah, I'd be hard-pressed to even remember where I put this. Although I do think it's a masterpiece of its genre. I'm not necessarily a massive Spielberg fan to begin with, but I've always really enjoyed this, and I've always thought it had really good rewatchability, and I've always really enjoyed every time I've watched it. I think it looks exceptional as well. I think it's aged so wonderfully. I love the blues. I love like the sort of hints of like the whites and the yellows it has as well, especially on the beach. That dolly shot he does on the beach with Brody. I mean, like especially like 2-3 years before he'd done Jewel, and then Sugarland Express, and then something. Is it Something Evil he did? He did a haunted house movie, like a horror movie. This is Spielberg, so it's a massive jump, and it's so fun to go back and watch this and to see the sort of tent pole of what it started. Because I'll let you go next, right? But I have a really controversial claim about this film, which I was hoping Mr. Uncut Gem would be on here, or one part of them, Jakob, Flash, because I wanted to have a small debate here, because I don't think, there's a little bit of a clue here, I don't think this is the tentpole start of a blockbuster. I think something came a little bit before it, but it'd be really interesting to debate this with you, because I think, I don't know, because you've done a lot of research, you said. I'm really interested to find, but I've always enjoyed this. I've always liked to go back to it, and I think it still holds up for, 1975? Whew, it's amazing. Really, really good stuff. But I'll leave it on to you anyway.
I don't really recall having an early relationship to Jaws, this film specifically. My sister, who's a little bit older than me, loved horror movies and loved forcing me to watch them when we were home alone together. I remember Jaws 3D, and I think I mentioned this a few episodes ago on the podcast for like Question of the Week or something. But I remember Jaws 3D, the underwater tunnel, and specifically like that squid arm. I remember like that visual in my head from being super young. But I don't have any memory of, like, I'm sure I watched Jaws. Or maybe I didn't. I don't know. But I don't remember this specific film. And then when you got to like middle school and you start to explore, I think I first found Jurassic Park because I was like, oh, dinosaurs. That's an incredibly fun concept. And we'll get there in a few weeks. But then I naturally kind of found myself going to Jaws. And I love this film. I mean, I don't think that's too hot of a take. I don't know if we're going to have too many hot takes here as far as quality. Every time I watch this, especially this time, because it's been a few years, and I don't remember where I placed it on that top 100 list you mentioned that we did on Patreon. Sadly, I deleted the Letterboxd list, and I don't think I'm going to listen to all like 8 hours of that
I
again to
did the
figure it
same
out.
thing. I've
But
done the same thing, yeah.
I think it's really hard to watch this with all the context of it and say this isn't probably one of the best films ever made. Not that it isn't one that got incredibly lucky with certain things. I mean, the shark breaking down obviously is like a huge cultural thing, but and that leads to a philosophy in the film that really works. But even beyond that, I mean, you mentioned the cinematography here. I don't think I've ever seen like the sky shot in this beautiful of way with the colors and with just even the framing of it. Every single choice here is so supremely crafted and it's so well done. It's thrilling, it is scary, it is entertaining, it is everything in here you would want from a summer blockbuster. And the shark, I think, just again really hammering it in, the usage of the shark, and this is not at all a hot take, please don't make me think I'm doing something special here, is just so perfectly handled, to where that just ties it in all together. I'm a big fan of bad shark movies. I will watch, just randomly be like, I want to watch a shark film today because I want to see that absolute like garbage. I don't think there's been one that has a limitation with a shark that handles it so well compared to this. I really, really appreciate the film. What is your take, though, that you want to debate about the blockbuster?
Well, I'll leave that just for a second, right? But because it's interesting to go to the formulation of this film, but it's up to you. I can start. I'll tell you what. Let's start as we mean to go on. I don't. When I see the 1970s, right? We have the auteur, we have the new kids on the block with the Coppolas, the Brian De Palmas, the Spielbergs, and the George Lucas, and I think there's tentpole movies within there that change Hollywood for multiple variety of reasons. If it's self-finance, if it's funding, if it's how to shoot it, to what to shoot it on, the idea of taking a little bit more of edgy sort of tones like The Godfather, and then redeveloping what it is to be the blockbuster with Jaws, and then you get to Star Wars in '77, a few years later. I think there's a film before this that takes exactly the same type of formula that this does in a different genre. Now, I'll just wait a second for anyone who wants to pause now and try and guess what it is. But do you have any idea what I'm talking about, Carson?
I do not off the top of my head.
The only reason why I bring this up is because we did a massive episode on Uncut Gems about it, and I only had a cameo, so go listen to it. It's on their Patreon as well. It's a fabulous episode, 2.5 hours, and then we also did a lot of films, a lot of discussions about the sequels. But we'll, go watch that as well and listen to it. I think it's actually The Exorcist. I think The Exorcist is based on a book, like this is. It has a formula of a director who is coming from the establishment and going what they would consider wayward to make something slightly more provocative, which is William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist, and Spielberg did the same with Jaws. They take newfound actors like Linda Blair, this one with the likes of Richard Dreyfuss, and they bring in the old school with the likes of Max von Sydow, and then this is with Robert Shaw, and you can probably put Roy Scheider in there as well. And it's a difference between sort of new Hollywood and old Hollywood. The only difference I think of the two of them is which leads me on to my second point, is that why is The Exorcist not considered the actual tentpole blockbuster? Because you see the New York theater posters, it's running for like 2 years. People are being sick in the aisle. It's notoriety. It's utterly like bombastic. People are going out there. It makes hundreds of millions of dollars for Warner Brothers, and then that's it. You get a sequel in 1977, which is John Borman's Atrocity. We go to the other podcast for that as well. The only one thing that I think that separates The Exorcist to Jaws is genre, tone. One does not sacrifice any such for William Peter Blatty's thematic on religion and gore and the idea of what is right and what is wrong and all that stuff. Jaws probably takes that more of a backseat. Granted, there's a bit of gore here, pushes the boundary for what it was. Remember, it's a 15 and it's a 12 in the UK. It's had a BBFC justification on its bordering. I don't know if the same is in the MPAA. You'd probably be better to say that than I am. But I think that Jaws is the idea of that the notoriety comes from the fact that it's this big epic thing, not out of tone. It's not, oh, we have to go see that because someone's neck breaks, or there's like this, or you've got to see this because an actor says a certain word, or you've got to go see it like Psycho was, because oh my god, like the twist. I think there's a notoriety here because of the idea of like this is something completely different, but it's like so much fun, like the entertainment. And I think Jurassic Park reiterates the same thing. But out of the two of them, I can only think is that when people saw this making money, and people, like you said, with the preview screenings, it was at 900 theatres and they cut it down. There's also some hesitation there just because of the system. But granted, I think people looked at this and realised we may have something here. We can put a horror film in October. We can do a Christmas film at Christmas. Why can we not make a tentpole summer movie that when all the kids are out of school, and we can make it sort of an age range where they can bring the adults, but the adults can still enjoy it. We may have a thing here. And I think to sell The Exorcist is a different one at NC-17, or even X rating probably at the time, and then selling Jaws. So I think The Exorcist gets a little bit of a pushback because of that. But because this works for the audience of your family, your mother and your father can go and you can bring your children, so on and so forth. I think it's just a really good melding. And also think it's one of those films where you talk about, like, we both watched it probably at different times, but I think exactly the same sort of motivations. If you're watching something that's a bit more edgier, and I want to word that very loosely because it's not edgy at all, but it's a bit more gripping than your average sort of, the dinosaurs or a bookstore, a bookstore is, what is it? A Bug's Life, sorry.
A Bug's Life.
But also Toy Story 2 as well, which is stuff like that. I think you go from those type of films and you go to your YA stuff, which now is massive with the Hunger Games. But at the time, you had Lord of the Rings. You probably got away with the Harry Potters, and probably the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans. At that time, like, those are the things where it's adult orientated for like a kid. This is the perfect time in the 1970s when it's booming to get bums on seats. That just came at the right time. So I hope that sort of unravels a little bit there. I know I've gone on a little bit, but I do think that if they cut down The Exorcist to a PG-13, I think we would be having a completely different conversation. I think it would radicalise the MPAA even more so. We would probably have had to have another code, a Hays Code, in a different way. So I'm thankful for Jaws to opening the floodgates, but we would probably have been in such a different place if Friedkin's film was cut down to the extent of, like Jaws would be, because you could do Jaws like The Exorcist. You could do Jaws with horrific gore, but it has that restraint from a let's say, I don't want to say an auteur because I don't necessarily think Spielberg is, but from a creative who understands, if I don't do that, I'm not just sacrificing the audience, but I'm also sacrificing the film. I think Spielberg follows a really good thin line on his filmography of being able to give for one and give for other. Whereas I think a lot of the other 1970s creatives, De Palma, Coppola, Friedkin, probably Robert Altman as well, were not willing to do so. So there's a lot to talk about. So I'll let you go on from there what you think about that. But I do think that this is very lucky. I think we'll go into the production, but it's an interesting one, isn't it? Like when you compare the 1970s, that 2 years later we have another boom. But I do think 73 is the one, really.
No, I mean, I think that's a perfect comparison. If just to be transparent, when creating this series, which also was hell to try to narrow down all the blockbusters throughout cinema history, I almost started with The Exorcist, but we did that episode on it, so I didn't start with it. But and you get also just, I think the religious element is huge with The Exorcist, right? On as far as like there are people who are going to reject that film based on just religious morals and principle entirely. So Jaws is much more not just family friendly as far as the age, but like morally, I think America in the 1970s are much more ready to take on a shark than a possessed little girl.
Yeah.
Which valid, I guess. But yeah, I mean, and also I think you can't look at cinema within a vacuum, right? Every single release builds on top of each other. So if 2
Yes.
years earlier you get this huge phenomenon, like I think right now of Barbenheimer and how big that was, and how studios are already trying to be like, guess what? You could do Saw Patrol. But like, I think if you go and have a ton of fun with The Exorcist, you're gonna naturally be wanting to have that experience again, and that thrill and that excitement of everyone going, and it's the most terrifying thing in the world. And then you get Jaws, which is like the perfect floodgate to not only get those people who did The Exorcist and want that experience again, but also those who were not willing or not able due to age to engage with that.
Indeed.
I think it's a perfect setup. I mean, it is gasoline on a fire that undeniably is already lit. And to be clear, it was lit before The Exorcist even. That's kind of the modern start of it. But, shockingly, we don't have a Gone with the Wind episode on the series. But yeah, I think that's a wonderful like comparison. And that's one of the best things I'm so excited for with the series is we're going in chronological order. So like seeing it build on top of each other and develop and evolve. But like, yeah, I think that's a wonderful, wonderful point.
Can I
Go for it.
I'm just gonna ask you a question. That you said there that after they watched The Exorcist, they wanted to have that feeling again. What do you think is the feeling of Jaws then? Because you said about like the like Reagan and the not Ronald Reagan, but he's got something. We'll come to that later on in the series. You talk about like the notoriety of The Exorcist, and that's what sells itself. But Jaws doesn't do that, and that's what I tried to make mention of my other tidbit before. Jaws doesn't sell itself on notoriety. Jaws sells itself on an experience. And granted, you could probably say The Exorcist does also, but it evolved into like the experiences is so wild because of this, like, and that's where the notoriety comes because the little girl's saying the C word and stuff like that, and she wasn't saying camp, she was saying something entirely different, but but Jaws is sold of the idea of like have you seen like this film, like have you seen like the shark in this film, like you have to wait for it. I think it's one of those, it's the beginning of the FOMO as well, like you've got to see this, you've got to go out and see this, I think that's where it comes from, but I'd be very intrigued to know what your thought about what that buzz is then. What's the connection? What are people wanting to get? Is it a different experience? Is it the FOMO? Is it just seeing something different? I don't know. What do you think?
See, I think it's layered. I think part of it is what the film actually is, but a lot of it is just like, I think the community aspect and that experience of lining around the block, going in with a packed theater and having this community moment, and the FOMO is there also. I think that's what I was more referring to with that is like, yes, within the film, you have to wait for the shark. It's a great film in general, but it's not so much the content within that film, but it's waiting for that next community moment that everyone can go. Again, similar to Barbenheimer, I'd compare it to, where you have to go, not because necessarily even you're that invested per se in the film on concept, but because everyone is talking about it, everyone is going to it. And especially if you live somewhere that doesn't have it, you have to take a car and travel. Like it's an event, right? Jaws itself transcends what's on the actual runtime. It becomes an event on release, I would say. So that's what I was more referring to, is that community
Yeah,
aspect and that event, being part of it.
yeah. Because there's actually a big weight between the blockbusters, isn't there? Because like I don't know what you're going to do after this. I always like to quite find out in the moment. I think it's really fascinating what you've chosen, so I'm not too sure. But from the 1970s point of view, you have The Exorcist in '73. I'm just talking about blockbusters, really, but I can't mention The Godfather because I think it's a different conversation entirely. But then you have this in '75. Then you have Star Wars in '77. There's quite a big gap to even wait. Now it's such a saturated market. Like you watch like the Fall Guy, then you've got Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Then we're gonna have like I don't know whatever comes out next, and you've got that after next and stuff like that. And there's very much a saturated market. I think Barbenheimer is interesting because it's like there's just two differential pieces coming together. Like there's a dissonance there, a very masculine and a very feminine. And I think it's great to get people to go watch that in a pairing. It's a very strange coupling, but it undoubtedly works because of the experience in itself. But we live in such a saturated market that I remember like the Family Guy made a joke about Empire Strikes Back, like the ending, the cliffhanger, and they were like, "We've got to wait 3 years for another one." Like we forget, like but just because of that Netflix model and stuff that you can watch all the episodes at once, and we have so many like things to be documented and to view and screen. Like a
Hey, we're
two,
all waiting for that Fast 10. We're all waiting for the Fast 11 to continue that
yeah,
cliffhanger. And Mission Impossible also, but,
yeah, no,
Fast
no,
was more funny.
yeah. There's definitely them still there, and
Yeah.
they do still hold massive audiences. Fast and Furious is like a beast in its own right, and Mission Impossible is still in all strong. Bond would probably be another one, and there's probably a few I'm forgetting. Don't get me wrong. Kingdom of Planet of the Apes is beginning to be another one as well, which is so good to be able to hold an audience for 3, 4, 5 years. Like in the
See, I
seven.
just I
Go
don't
on.
think those films are cultural moments though. Like Barbenheimer. I'd probably say
Of
before
course, yeah,
Barbenheimer, it would probably be No Way Home. Like those are like the blockbuster big hits. To where
yeah,
like I
yeah,
think we are living in a saturated marketplace, but like I don't know how much of a cultural impact Ghostbusters Frozen Empire has. Like I'm not I don't I think it's saturated, but as far as the big cultural moments, it still is, once every couple years, maybe, depending how you look at it. I mean, I don't know if you would consider like Avatar to be one of those as far as the Way of Water, but like,
yeah.
I think it's still, no matter how saturated cinema gets, I think it still is on a very similar time scale there in the 70s as it is now, where it takes a certain type of film. It can't be any movie. It has to be something presenting something new, a big picture that people want to see, that there's hunger for. I mean, you get The Exorcist with the demon stuff, here with the shark, Star Wars with space adventure stuff. I mean, every single one, and even now, even you look, and Barbenheimer has that cultural moment as far as those two films. No Way Home has all the Spider-Mans. Like those films, there has to be something there. It can't just be any movie to get that level. But I still think we're looking at, when you really consider what films truly blew up, maybe you could say No Time to Die. I don't know about that with the Bond stuff specifically, but I still think we're looking at once every couple 2-3 years.
Oh, what I meant was not. I think I think it got misconstrued in what I said. What I mean is that we have such a saturated market that when you have a blockbuster released, I do find it quite surprising if it can hold an audience. I mean, so like the wait between one to another, I find quite interesting to what can hold or maintain a large populace of an audience. So what I mean is when you compare it to like Jaws and then you compare it to Star Wars, there's a 2 year gap there of the unknown, and then The Exorcist to Jaws. I don't think anyone even sort of realized what planet Earth was happening at that point with the idea of cinema and where it was evolving to. Now it's different. Now we know that in a year's time or in 6 months' time, we'll have another blockbuster. So the difference I find when I compare them is that what can hold an audience now with an expected audience, and in layman's terms, it's like the suggestion of Kingdom of Planet of the Apes is a franchise, but it's had 5, 6, 7, 8 years of a gap to maintain that level of an audience structure of going to go watch it. it to me is fascinating when you compare like that Fall Guy comes out one week, then in 2 or 3 weeks time we'll have another blockbuster, and the audience range just completely fumbles. So it's interesting. My point was, it's interesting that when you look at a blockbuster, what it entails to be able to keep an audience, because at the time, I don't, granted, Jaws probably would do well because it's a creature feature. Even if it didn't do particularly well in the box office, it would have been pushed to a cult classic midnight screenings. It had been torn to death in the grindhouse because it is a creature feature, and people will sort of lapping that shit up, especially the Italians. But and then the 2 year wait to Star was like, what is this? Now it's so consistently like, oh, we get this, we get that. And you mentioned the Fast and Furious. We all know, like, when that film comes out, it's going to make millions and millions of dollars. It might make $1 billion. We'll know when the next Jurassic World comes out, it'll make $1 billion. And granted, probably the point I'm making is that these are all established franchises. But when you mention Barbie and Oppenheimer, they're not. Yes, Barbie's is not an original IP by any means, but it's still a risk of a blockbuster in terms of tone and genre, and probably undoubtedly thematic more so. But Oppenheimer is a 3 hour movie that's half in black and white, half in color about the nuclear bomb. You know, then they're not structured as a blockbuster. The Fall Guy is. Why is Oppenheimer making almost $1 billion and the Fall Guy can't make 30, 40 million opening weekend? I think it's very interesting to look at the deconstruction of a blockbuster. And when you go back to Jaws, what is it that actually maintains people and audiences going to go watch it? It has to be something I think is fresh. I mean, granted, this is defining a blockbuster in general, but it has to feel fresh at least. Like you said, why do I need to go watch something in the next like 2 weeks when I know like this is going to come out, save you money? It has to be bang for your buck. You've got to go in it knowing that I'm going to get something out of it, because blockbusters are so regular. You need something to at least save you money on. And I do think you need an idea of at least someone involved in the project where you think, this is interesting, or this could be interesting, or I'll go watch that because he is interesting or she's interesting. And I think the one here is probably Spielberg. I would probably make it's like this young kid Spielberg's like next big thing. I think Ari Aster's had a similar sort of identity of like, oh, I don't know who he is, I don't really know anything about him, but like, oh, his name was on there, let's go watch it. And I think at one point, in a very strange way, Judd Apatow was similar. I think names just have like a brand, or they're at least building to one, even though they don't know. But I come back to Jaws, and I was asking myself this question when I was driving today: what makes this click? And I'm still like really struggling not to make like a silly, like obvious statement where it just all comes together. It's fun, it's entertaining, it's action packed, it has really good character, and it's shot really well. And it's not too long at just 2:02. I think it's 2 hours and 2 minutes. And for 1975, it's still got a bit of a, no tongue in cheek, but a bit of a bite to it. But I was thinking, I've sort of come to the realization is that what makes this really work in the short run is the shark, because it's frightening and it's shot really well. But what makes this stay is the characters. Not one person who I know who'll maintain a sequence of like, oh, when the shark blows up, that's the best part. It's always the Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, Roy Scheider having a conversation about the USS Indianapolis on the boat, talking about like where he got bit. Like, that's the best scene, and it's just 3 characters. And I think that's what maintains this being so immersive and so entertaining, is that you've got 3 idiosyncratic, multifaceted characters that are from east, west, north, that complete polar opposites, come together, and you just have like sparks. And it is like literally lightning in a bottle. And I don't, I know that I want to sort of elevate the conversation, but without trying to like really patronize an audience, it is really that simple. That's as far as I can go with trying to explain why this works compared to this sort of the shit you see now.
I mean, it has the goods, not to like
Oh
put it,
god, yeah.
simple, but like, and I think looking at, I mean, to ask you a question, not to just keep going back to it, but like, do you think Barbenheimer is as big as it is if both films are not like as well received as they are, like as far as being good?
No, I think it's people
No.
being starved of just something. I do think that the market is
Yeah.
saturated. That you know, I will watch The Fall Guy, but
Yeah.
I would usually go watch everything. With work, I have to prioritize stuff. So my weekends very much like I need to keep it free for Sunday. I want to record for this, and then Saturday I want to at least go watch a movie in the morning. And when you go look at stuff, last week I could have watched Kingdom or The Fall Guy. Obviously, I was going to watch Kingdom, but I just thought to myself, like, I'm not really bothered about Fall Guy. I'll just watch it on demand. And that to me is sort of like a travesty. And I have to ask myself why. Like, I went to go watch Barbie and Oppenheimer a day apart because I did the 3 hours, the screenings like wouldn't align for me. I like to watch them back to back. And I asked myself, like, again, why not watch The Fall Guy? But why go watch those two? And I think it is the aspect of the critical acclaim is there, and I know I'm going to at least enjoy it. But I think also they just feel like more culturally like relevant. They feel big staples in like, oh, Greta Gerwig's going to make a Barbie movie. Like that sounds
Oh,
cool to
yeah.
me, but it also feels like it's going to be a dent. An Oppenheimer having a complicated relationship with Christopher Nolan in itself with his filmography. I want to go watch that, and I want to see an evolution. I want to see something that I know I'm going to be blown away by, but I think that artistic merit comes into it as well. Both films are going to be artistically very interesting. And with David Leitch, it's hard for me to sort of suggest that this would. I'm not seeing The Fall Guy. That would be any different to Bullet Train. That would be any different to Deadpool 2. Whereas then I compare that to Oppenheimer and Barbie, and then go back to Jaws. They feel different. They feel unique. I think I need that. I think a uniqueness. I want to see something crazy. I want to go watch Dune in the cinema because it's not been really done before. I want to go watch. I would want to go watch Jaws in the 1975 because it's like I'd love to have watched this with my dad. I'd love my dad to have taken me to this. I remember watching I know it's probably going to come up later, but I remember ironically with its anniversary, the 25th anniversary. I remember when I went to go watch The Phantom Menace. My dad took me and my sister, and they'd known about the other films. I didn't. It blew my fucking mind. Lord of the Rings blew my mind. The Matrix blew my mind. These are all incredibly iconic, visceral experiences that have a very unique visual artistic merit, and I think that comes down to it. I think it's thesis. I think it's abstract. Jaws is different because it's a one of a kind at the time, but now when you compare it, I think you have to have something that's like compelling. I know I'm going fucking off here, and I'm granted like bingo card. Jack's talking shite, but there's a horror movie coming out. I think is it A Violent Nature, where it's a POV one.
In a Violent Nature, yeah.
I mean, like it's going to make a lot of money, even if it doesn't get in everything. It's going to make a lot of money because it's an abstract of a generic tale that's just done differently. Like
Yeah.
it's shocking to me that the idea of a simple subversion in cinema hasn't quite caught on. Whereas you do something slightly unique about something, and it's like, wow, well, we've done a totally different film. Cinema can be that simple. Having a shark follow three people in a boat trying to kill them at sea is like the Moby Dick. It's like a simplistic biblical story, but the abstract here and the subversion is that we're not really going to see the shark, but when you do, I'm going to make it so terrifying and so real and raw. And when the time comes, we're gonna have that shark like bite the limbs off Robert Shaw, and we're gonna blow it up. There feels even there like they're gonna push it. Let's push it. Let's make something big. Let's make something
Yeah.
big. I don't know. I just think that it takes risks as well. But it's a family story. It has everything. It's very difficult to sort of compare it to its not its ancestors, but its children. Let's say. But yeah, I don't know. I need artistic merit. I need something unique. I need something new. I need flavor. I need texture. I presume you'll be somewhat similar because we're sort of interconnected. We are separated at birth in one way. But I'd be interested to know your point of view on that. What is it similar to the Jaws effect that you find in Blockbuster now that you sort of stay away from or will attend to, if that makes any sense?
What can I say? I don't know. You kind of called me out. I've not seen The Fall Guy. I think that's most anyone's ever talked about The Fall Guy on a Jaws review. But I did this week watch In a Violent Nature because that was
Wow,
interesting to
did
me.
you really?
And The Fall Guy, genuinely, it was on
Oh
my rapid reviews.
no.
We'll get there. But I
This is not
am going to
planned.
watch The Fall Guy. No,
Not planned at all.
no. Um, It really has to be something, and I think it's difficult now with VOD especially, because I do have something, and I've been so busy with work that it's been a
Yeah.
real struggle just to get to the theater for even things I want to see. So I look at something like The Fall Guy, and I even like the director. I'll be honest, think I love Bullet Train. I think that's a really, really
No, I
great
like
action
it. Yeah, yeah. I
blockbuster.
like it as well. Yeah,
Um, I just know I can watch that in 4 weeks. It's literally next weekend, or by the time this comes out, it's on VOD.
yeah,
There's
Tuesday.
no
Yeah.
cultural relevance. No person I know in real life saw this film, so there's no one to talk to. There's no reason why I have to see it this weekend. I'm not reviewing it for a podcast. I'm not writing a review. So why would I go see The Fall Guy? Or well, it's could be a potentially fun film in the theater, but like so many of new releases are just absolute garbage that I would rather just not waste my time doing that. So I just think like everything comes together to where it's like it's not helping to where I want to go see a lot of films in the theater at this point.
Mm.
It's the ones like In a Violent Nature that have some element to it where it's like, oh, that's a really interesting concept that I want to see on screen. Sasquatch Sunset, I wanted to see in theaters because it's an interesting concept that
Yes.
at least, even if it's not good, and we'll get there with my rapid reviews, it's providing something to where like that is a concept I am interested by. So there's some natural draw for me to go to the theater outside of just the notion that I like cinema and I want to see a movie. With blockbusters and with Jaws, I mean, I think the biggest thing is quality and a promise that it's going to deliver on something grander of that an experience. I think it's really interesting, and we'll get to the MCU in this series eventually down the line in a couple months. But like, you look at Infinity War, you look at Endgame, that is promising the goods on something that a series that has been widely acclaimed. A lot of people really like that MCU. I'm more indifferent, but like that is promising the end to such a big story that you have to go see it because it's like a spectacle it becomes. I'm very curious when we get 4 or 5 years down the line and these new Avengers films come out, how they do, considering the MCU has been in such a lull recently. I don't know if that goodwill and that like trust that it's going to deliver something huge is going to actually be experience there. But I think ultimately it comes down to it has to be good. I think it has to promise something unique and interesting. I guess those are like the two sides of it, because I didn't really care about Furiosa, but all the reviews are amazing. So like I
Yeah.
have to go see Furiosa now in the theater for sure. I already was, but like I think that is one of those films where the quality, according to people who've seen it, is high enough to where it creates a moment that I feel like I need to go experience it. Or you can promise something conceptually, like In a Violent Nature or Sasquatch Sunset, to where I'd want to go experience that. So I guess for me, it's one of those two pathways. And I think Jaws works on both. And I think that's something we're going to see a lot of the series is like conceptually, I think the idea of the shark, how they use the shark is interesting, but also the quality is really good. It's a really good movie that I enjoy watching. So on both of those fronts, it is working for me. And it's something that if I was in 1975, I would want to go and experience that film for both those reasons. So I guess for me, and this is like a really messy ramble, it'd be those two pathways.
I mean, if I had to have a theory here about this series we're doing on ClapperCast, right? I'll tell you right now, and this is a personal experience, but I have a feeling this will be a highlight of both those. Everyone you pick, right? And I don't know what we're going to do each week. You're going to tell me after we record the show. After, when everyone else finds out, I find out. I don't know. I have an idea because I know the form of cinema. I have an idea. Every time we pick something that's original IP or fresh, me and you will both say this is really cool. This is really amazing. And then we'll get further and further, and then we'll start doing sequels of stuff, or we'll start doing properties of a larger base franchise, and we'll both start being tired about it. And I think that's the big thing. What's going to happen here is, and it goes back to feeling fresh, feeling unique. And I think that ultimately it's reinstated in my opinion is that because this is so fresh and because it's so unique with Jaws at the time, it has this abundance of entertainment value. It still feels fresh to watch, and it's interesting even when you compare it in the sort of the house that it built. They could never quite get it right after the fact. They changed they never changed the narrative. They changed the concept, which is sort of a good idea of a sequel if you're going to make your money back. And there's sort of rewarding stuff with Jaws 2 to watch, and with 3D. I can't stand the fourth one. You know, I'm sure someone on this podcast would have defended it, but he's not here, so we can shit on it. But no, there becomes a tedious tiredness nature to it, and it's so interesting to look through this early period because we don't have that. we don't have that foresight. We have these fresh, new, unique takes of a young kid called Spielberg who'd made Dune. So that's going to get a retrospective in the space of 2 years. He'd done Sugarland Express with Goldie Hawn, which is like his little bit of a going out the Scorsese route that he'd done as well. And then he'd done, like I said, Something Evil in '72. So you've got in the space of in 4 years, the kid had cracked on, and he was definitely like the disciple of a because I have not seen The Fabelmans yet, and it's actually a disservice. I should probably watch that tomorrow just to sort of contextualize my thoughts here. But he comes from the school of like the John Fords, and a lot Spielberg does as well. Tarantino talks about this in Cinema Speculation about they're all trying to search for their searchers. And when you look at Spielberg, I don't really see that. I see a director searching for, I want to make entertainment value, and I want to make it progressive, but also keep the internal idea of what cinema is. It should be a bit of a sparkle. And for all the graciousness I can give Spielberg, he still directs like he's a 14-year-old watching cinema. And not to get like soppy here, but that is such a wonderful notion to have as a filmmaker. Like he could get away with Ready Player One, and I know that's a controversial hit its own side, but watching that film, if that was any other director, I know I would have slated that to hell. But when you look at a director who's still evolving with FEX, but then having to deal with the IP issues that has, and then make a story, it feels only sensible that a director who adores cinema, especially like just wanting to be entertained, to have a sparkle in his eye, is Steven Spielberg. And in this film, you can see like he's like, granted, the contextual story about this narrative and this production was a nightmare. Sharp would never work. He shot on open sea half the time, and mechanical was horrific because he wanted to go back to like the Fords and shoot on location, and really he should have shot it on a sound stage. It probably would have come in far dear under budget. But he's also got that fire underneath his ass that if he doesn't make this right and it bombs, he may not have a career after that. It's a big film for him, but he still has that little sparkle, that smile on his face. And when you watch the behind the scenes, which you said of watching the documentary, he speaks of it so highly. And within his filmography, it's like 6 or 7. He's got those big hits in there, Close Encounters, E.T. Like, like it really is like it's a pivotal film in cinema, but in a filmography, it's like in his top 5. That's crazy to have that conversation. That's absolutely crazy to have a monumental piece that changes the lineage of cinema as is, and it's not even in the director's film top 10, maybe top 5 filmography. I'm sure it is, but that's crazy to me. But going back to the point, I just think you have that sparkle. It has this identity. It has this a director who wants to personally entertain you, wants to take you to oh god, I've just forgotten what the island's called now. Oh my god, what's it called?
Martha's Vineyard.
No, not Martha's Vineyard. Is that what the island's called?
Oh, Amity.
Amity
Amity.
Island. Yeah,
Yeah,
he wants to
it's
take.
filmed at Martha's.
Yeah, sorry, he wants to take you there, and he wants to take you there with a with a really interesting aspect. The one, I mean, just from the opening, like the tone that this guy sets, all underwater, the theme tune set. So we have no idea where we're going. We're traveling. We are the shark at this point. So we have wonderful like underwater camera footage, which I've always had like this soft spot for watching that. Like I've just reviewed Revenge of the Black Lagoon, but I watched it like a month ago. Like a good underwater camera, and I just watched The Abyss as well, which we'll get onto later. Um, I have like I love that. I love we're watching something in real time, shot for shot. It's actually reality of something that unordinarily we wouldn't be able to witness. And there's something like it might be like something's not clicking upstairs, but that's just something that gets me off a little bit in cinema. I don't know why. It's just something that I find really fun. That might sound like really sort of ill there, but no. But going back to the point, and then we have the infamous John Williams' theme tune, so simple. And then we have a group of kids on a beach. She runs off, and she's just died, unfortunately, which is really sad to know. The woman who played the actress who played the young woman who gets eaten at the beginning, she's just died like I think 2 weeks ago. So there's a poignancy there as well. But she goes on this swim. She goes out there and she gets pulled, and that's it. We're at top of the water. She gets pulled again, and she starts to panic, and there's no music, and then bang, she gets pulled, dragged under, and it's sort of like this wonderful PG-13 thing where we're not really. It should be a bit darker than it is, but it's still like this is quite dark. It's quite edgy. I think I sort of love those moments where directors like really sort of having fun with it. But so I hope that answers you. Again, I've rambled there a lot, but I just hope that when people look at this, it's aged wonderfully as well. There's still no comment about, oh, the shark looks fake. It still frightens me to death. There's still, David Fincher said himself, and again, we're going to the fundamental aspect of influence here. He did a documentary. I think he was not documentary. I think he might have done it on Side by Side, the Keanu Reeves thing, but also I think he did some press for The Girl with Dragon Tattoo, and he said that film should be absorbed by its. I'm not paraphrasing. I'm just like talking my ass. But he said along the lines of, film should be like a vast influence on someone. Like I don't go in deep water ever since I watched Jaws. That's a monumental influence. And I think his films are eerily similar in that they stay with you in a different morbid way. But Jaws stays with you on an action level. But there's also that horrifying feeling is that if you go into water, that's deeper than your knees, it's the Jaws effect. I mean, The Exorcist. You scared of the dark, But there are things that these films travel with, which work on a sublimable and subtextual level, but also on a humanistic level that still carry a massive amount of weight. So it's fabulous to see this as how it's evolved in this really scary thing.
And Spielberg's just direction. I mean, the logic he gives, which sounds obvious as a director or as a filmmaker, but like at every point, he's using logic to dictate what the audience will be thinking and then play against that. It's like he chose Martha's Vineyard because he could be far enough out to where you couldn't see shore to not take people out of it. So it's more intense because you can't see shore, you can't go back. I think shooting so many of this during the day, and we mentioned color and light, because you don't go to the beach at night, but if you go during the day, that's terrifying because you're not protected like so many other horror movies where it's like, oh, of course it's night now because it's about to be scary. You're not saved by the night. You're in the bright day. You can be killed right there in front of people. I mean, it is terrifying how much logic he puts into this, and it's so smart and worthwhile. I will say I'm interested with how this series goes. You mentioned how we're going to get to some sequels and stuff like that. I'm interested because Jaws was not made to be a blockbuster. It was not made with the intention that this is too big to fail. It's something that this stumbled upon. It's something that a lot of these earlier films are going to stumble upon. And then if we're going to get to the point where studios are starting to craft something to be a blockbuster with the intention of being this huge, massive hit, I'm thinking like Avengers and stuff. I'm very curious how that difference is going to feel with films that Spielberg is thinking it's going to get shut down every day, according to the documentary. Like, this is not a production that is safe or has a ton of funds, or it has this expectation we're going to make this many $100 million. It is something this film stumbles upon, and I think that allows this film to be, not have some of the sensibilities you would expect from directors who are trying to play it safe because they're trying to make these bigger hits. I think that's going to be an interesting conversation to have also. I'm really excited to see, and I think this is one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to do this this series of reviews, is comparing these early blockbusters to the modern blockbuster. I think it's going to tell us a lot about the modern state of cinema and the modern state of like why blockbusters, so many are failing, the box office is down, what's going wrong. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. I'm excited to see it grow. But Jaws, as everything you mentioned and everything everyone has mentioned since release, is such a special film, and it's so good. And still to this day, yes, it's an animatronic, but like there's something about just physically seeing that huge shark just roaming around the beach that it's thrilling. It's scary. I went to a fish market on the ocean yesterday on a pier, and I was like, oh, I feel like there could be a shark right there. Like, I don't, it feels like that because I watched Jaws. It's very, very exciting. And I really, again, impressed. Like, I think it is probably one of the best films ever made. I think you can't really take that away from this film. Certainly I love this film greatly, and I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, one primary reason I think going back on, and this goes to like a psychological level as well, but also on an entertainment level, going back to The Well here, and watching it again, you never feel like you sort of like you feel tired of it. You never feel bored of it, because I think the ethics of how it's made is what you've said yourself. It was not made to be a blockbuster. It was made to just be a film. It was meant to just find an audience. It wasn't premeditated. It wasn't all constructed in a backroom meeting of like, we want this here, we want this here. They had a young director who wanted to make a creature feature. And one reason why I think when it has rewatchability is it doesn't have that gross fingerprints of being constructed, like manipulated as well, like other things has. You know, we have like blockbusters now where you have like a cast where you use like why is he in this? Why is she in this? Like it feels strange to do this. It feels strange to put these one on one together and not feel more authentic. Like it doesn't find itself. It's constructed. It's like artificial. It's like AI in a way. It's being pre-built in a lab, being told a destiny, and what it's got to hit and how to hit it. In such of like box office receipts, numbers, and running times, especially like has to be under 2.5 hours. It has to be under 2.5 hours. Where I think that very little gets through there that feels authentic, feels engaging to watch because it feels real. Jaws is one of those features that it hasn't been built out of those meetings. One other aspect I wanted to get into, which I think again would have been fucking brilliant if he turned up, Jakob, but it'd be more so engaging to hear you as well, because he has a fascination with this film. He adores this film. Obviously, I think me and you we really like this, but I wouldn't say I'm a mega fan. One thing when you watch the documentary that you're talking about here is that Spielberg says he never went back to do the sequels because the shark never worked. Right? When you look at his filmography, Spielberg is a director who quite consistently goes back to places of simplicity and premeditated pieces of work that he's built upon. Indiana Jones is one of them. Jurassic Park is another that he's dabbled in, but he's consistently kept through with it in a vocal support or executive producing support. But mostly he has been behind the camera. I know he wants to go back to Tintin and stuff like that, but when you look at his filmography, we look at stuff and he always keeps this lineage of like wanting to like homage, and he wants to look at stuff, and if it's him and George Lucas in like putting C-3PO and in Indiana Jones, and then the R2D2's in there as well, and uh, you know it's interesting how he does into contextuality, but his features like you speak of India, and then you look at I mentioned Jurassic Park, they're all kept to a standard where he constantly sort of wants to take from. And when you look at uh, Ready Player One, all those pieces are in there. Jaws, however, is very rarely incontextualized within his filmography. He never really goes back into the water again in his filmography, probably because this is quite traumatic for him. But I don't think this is as a personal film to Steven Spielberg as maybe fans or the populace of cinema goers would suggest. I think this is a next evolution of going bigger to a studio by wanting more money to do something else. I see this as just a very small evolution on Jewel. I really do. I think that when you look at Jewel and you look at this has a higher budget and the concept is different. Sorry, the execution is different, but ultimately the concept is the same. We have a third party trying to kill our main characters. It feels like an indestructible element where it's fast, it's furious, and it will destroy. It's frightening it has a fury, let's say. But I don't see any personal identification in latter films where Jaws is re-referenced, even if it's subliminal, subtextual, contextual, or even thematic or tonal. I see a lineage of what Spielberg would do later on, but this to me feels like I want to make Jaws, and we call it Jaws. We'll base it on a book, and what we'll do is we'll make a bigger concept than Doom, but we'll just evolve it, and then we can show that we can do a bigger feature, and we'll get more seats. I don't think Spielberg knew that this was going to be a big blockbuster. I think it probably came far more quicker than he had anticipated, as well as Universal for that matter. And it jump-started his career probably tenfold more than it would do. But I don't see this connective tissue where he adores this material, because if not, he wouldn't have allowed anyone to make Jaws 2. It would have been him to do it, him take it to the death, like he did with Lost World. I think there's you can argue about the difference between Lost World and Jurassic Park in quality, but it's definitely a Spielberg sequel. And then when you get to Jaws 2, it just doesn't have that texture, it doesn't have that lineage of a personalization with the work. So I do think this is very interesting to say that even the director isn't construing this as like this is going to be a blockbuster. He hated making it. I think he wanted to give up. It wasn't going to make very much money. It just felt like, oh, I'll make this. I want to make a creature feature like Jewel, but we'll make it a bit different with a shark. I'll get Robert Shaw. We'll get this kid got Richard Dreyfuss and Roy Scheider. Be interesting to work with him. We'll get a few new stars and old stars, and then out of any and nothing, you have this blossoming of like this egg that just cracks open. You've got this beast like just changes the way we see cinema. I find it very interesting to see its connection with Spielberg, because I don't know. I just find that when I look at his work, this is very much like latter mentioned, which is I think going back to my point about being not even being in top 5. I just don't see him having a relationship with this like he has with Indy. It would have killed him not to make Dial of Destiny. Killed him. I don't think he gave a shit that he didn't make Jaws 2. I don't think he cared where the rights have gone. I don't think he cares anywhere else. Like James Cameron with Terminator. I think I've done it. I'm not bothered about the sequels. I'll support them and I'll produce them, but I'm done with it. Whereas I don't think James Cameron could let go of Avatar in the same way I don't think Spielberg can let go of Indy, but ultimately had to, and did with Jurassic Park as well. This is a total different beast. You go make that. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, okay. Which I find very interesting, considering like this is like a Spielberg film. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I don't think he cares about the material, and the connection to Duel is obviously there. But I will say, I think he doesn't care about the material, but I think the experience of making this film is obviously very close to him. I don't know if you ever heard the story, but on the back lot of the Universal tour or other Universal Studios where they make the films, like Spielberg has a lot of his sets still there. It's very weird. Like if you go on the backlot tour, there's like multiple big scale like Spielberg sets, but one of them is they have a pond and they have it look like Amity, and they had the original orca boat from Jaws. And he told this story in an interview where he would just go sit on the boat like every day. He would just go sit for like hours on the orca and just sit there and like reflect on his time making the film. And then
Wow.
one day they like took it and they tore it down for parts and like they broke it and he came to
Oh
sit
my
on his poor
god.
boat and it was just gone. But so I mean obviously this has some importance to him if he would go do like daily therapy at the boat sitting there looking
Yes.
at this pond with a version of Bruce. I don't think it's from the film, but a mechanical shark sitting there. Like that obviously must be quite like traumatic or something. But I think he does. This holds a very special place in his heart. I just don't think it is in the material. I don't think it's in the
Yeah.
characters like you mentioned. But I undeniably, and I think you're gonna love the Fablemans now that I'm like talking to you about this. But I do think that this is obvious. I mean, it makes total sense that the experience of this is obviously very, very deep within him.
Yeah, I mean, it's like trauma as well. I think anyone gone through trauma, it's hard to say because the experience is relative. So I don't want to undermine anyone's experience, but I think if you're lucky enough to conquer trauma, I think you look back on it and you appreciate the tissue that it builds upon. And I think, granted, going through something tragic is different to going through a movie production. Don't get me wrong, but the experience will still be relative to the person. And I think Spielberg will look on Jaws every day, wanting probably to drown off that boat and thinking, just set fire to everything like that. Let's fuck it off for an insurance deal. I need to get out of here. I think getting through it and then seeing the career that literally was like a phoenix born out of absolute like terror and fire. I can understand that relationship to it, but I do think it's a very different relationship, like you said, to a personal experience of the film. Knowing about it's always very important to know where things are from. It's important to know where the phone that you use every day, where that comes from. and with the negatives and positives around that. It should be very important that where your fruits from, stuff like that, where your food. There should always be an aspect of like we should all be appreciative of some stuff that with the negatives that come with it. I think that looking at Jaws and the experience, it's hard not to give it. God, credit. I'm like speaking through him like as a portal now, Spielberg. But I can understand that he would look at this in a different in a different experience to like Sugarland Express and doing something evil because of the trauma it connected. But it's interesting you talk about that thing on set, because I've been trying to watch the extended cut of Waterworld because one of my sister's favorite films, and I've always had a soft spot for it. And it has like a 55-minute extended cut, and Arrow Video released called the it's a proper American name. Is it Ulysses? Ulysses?
Ulysses.
Ulysses. That's it. Yeah, I think it's like the Civil War general. I mean, I don't know what I'm saying there. I think that's true. I don't know. I don't know. You're laughing, so I'm going to say yes. But I remember reading about it, and Kevin Reynolds, the director, went to Spielberg to talk about it because they were going to shoot on the ocean because Kevin Costner wanted to make it feel authentic, and they both spoke about it, like, yeah, it'd be right. We don't want to see Hawaii in the background. Obviously, the immersion of there being no island, it would be easy to do. And the one thing that Spielberg said, don't do it. Just don't do it. And Kevin Reynolds was like, oh, okay. We're still going to do it. And they went to go shoot Waterworld, and the story of Waterworld is the story of Waterworld. It killed Kevin Reynolds in his career. Him and Kevin Reynolds' relationship just deteriorated. It made no money, financial burden for Universal, granted, ironically, with Jaws as well. And yet nobody would believe the trial and tribulations of what Spielberg said. And it's interesting to look back at that sort of conversation and be like, Steven Spielberg. I mean, this is 1994 or 1996, so it's not like Spielberg is like, oh, Steven made that film. Like he's made some big films, You know, I think he's only a few years off Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan. So this is Academy Award winning Steven Spielberg is telling you, no, there's no ego there. There's no like, oh, he's being quite direct. Like, no, just don't do it. Shoot on a set. Shoot on a set. Like, it'll be a nightmare. It'll be an absolute nightmare. And then the green envy of Kevin Reynolds and Kevin Reynolds like, no, we'll do our own thing. I mean, it just goes to show that these directors who have been there and done it, you've got to sort of listen to the idea that these people have got extremely anecdotal portrayals of how to make cinema and the the trials and tribulations of how far it'll push them. So it's interesting to look at it. The one thing I did, not to like burn over any questions you were going to say, but one thing I find interesting is that this is like, I'm pulling this one out of my arse here, so bear with me, out of my arse. But when I was doing some research for this as well, the one thing I found really interesting is this based on a book. And I always find that there's no like way I'm going to go with this. I'm just going to state this, but I find it interesting that when you look at Spielberg and Kubrick's relationship, having like a weird friendship towards like the next 10, 15 years of both their lives, just through a mobile phone. It's interesting that when I think 75 is Barry Lyndon, and Spielberg and Kubrick's work is primarily based on adaptations that he would just deter, redevelop, and get a credit for it, which is really condescending. But I mean, read about the Shining's primarily example with Stephen King. But it's interesting that with Jaws, I get sort of the idea that Spielberg's looking at the same thing. I'll base it on a book, and then he does the very same thing with Jurassic Park with Michael Crichton's novel. And then obviously with Schindler's List and so on and so forth, and and then obviously Ready Player One. It's interesting again, like with the Tintin, and you can go through all of this, but it's also a 1970s thing, isn't it? It's also a Coppola thing. Bram Stoker's Dracula, then you have The Godfather, Mario Puzo's Godfather, and then you obviously you have William Friedkin's The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty. The idea that these directors came from a point of view of like, we can adapt. There's a lot of original IP with these directors, don't get me wrong, but we can adapt really good pieces of work here, and they had an idea of what worked. that's sort of gone slightly amiss now, hasn't it? Like you don't see directors. I'm trying to think. I'm not going to contradict myself here because I know Oppenheimer is based loosely.
Oppenheimer, yeah.
Yeah, but very very rarely it went. And this is going to be a social issue, and we'll probably talk about this far more in the series as it progresses. But the adaptation of the 1970s in books, and then you get to the 80s and the 90s, changes. It changes in the fact that comics and graphic novels become items in themselves, and it becomes a new wave thing. And it changes the idea of novels becoming, so graphic novels and comics becoming sequels to work, Alien versus Predator, that then spawn feature films that based on an IP of an IP. But then the graphic novel and the comic book comes into fruition with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, with the Dark Knight, and then you have the MCU stuff. So it's interesting that this is probably more conversation with the Blockbuster. Where do you think that then has evolved from? So you've got the book, the novel, the great novels. I mean, maybe not so, but perhaps just good work of novels to be adapted. That then,
Novels are good. I read both Jaws and Jurassic Park, and they're both good.
wow, okay, interesting because Blatty's novel's meant to be really good as well, and Puzo's novel's very good. But The Shining's meant to be like very dense work. I mean, Stephen King's works dense to begin with, but you have that, you have the books, and then it goes to the graphic novel and comic books. What do you think is the evolutionary change there then with these directors, and where do you think that cross references with the Blockbuster? Is it easy to adapt that work? Is it because of the frame of reference? Is it because there's a pre-existing IP attached to it? Um, what do you feel about that?
I think it's kind of hard to answer. I mean, I think that obviously in the Jaws era, I don't know if it's necessarily that connected truly. I think it's good concepts for books, or like good books with good concepts, and then just naturally like that creates an interesting piece, because also like each one has this really worthwhile piece of like iconography attached, whether it's a demon, a shark, a dinosaur, right? Like, so I don't know if it's necessarily though attached to like it being an adaptation, but I think the adaptation is just like when you have all of these books to pick from, you're naturally going to get interesting ideas. But and then obviously like you mentioned, it's gone away mostly. I think that really comes from like we're trying to build franchises, we're trying to build series, we're trying to build universes. A lot of these books, Jaws, the book is not setting up a universe, and there's
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of areas you can go, as we'll see with the franchise. There's not a lot of areas you can go with sequels or with building these characters out. So like, I think it's more correlation rather than causation. I don't think it's necessarily because they're adaptations that's why they blew up as blockbusters. But I think that when you have these good ideas, whether it's present from an original source or a book source, it works. And also, I guess with books, like it is easier. You're taking these ideas and then you're changing cinema to figure out how to adapt them. You're figuring out how to create a shark. You're figuring out how to create a demon. You're figuring out how to create a dinosaur. So I guess that could be it, is like just having these base ideas form in another medium then pushes the art form of cinema to adapt to them. But I don't know if I would say it's necessarily overly connected.
I'll say this. I think there's two major issues with the adaptation of the books and the graphic novels and the blockbuster. The first one is that during the 1970s, the art form of the novel was this sort of, it was an artistic thing to be well read, to be well educated. That and cinema never sort of came into intertwined before that. Cinema in the 50s and 40s were considered like a lesser artistic experience rather than the book and the theatre. Then the 60s, it sort of changes into sort of more genre work, like the likes of Psycho. And the 70s is the experience that, again, the blockbuster rises. It becomes monumental, and sort of theatre and the book within the artistic conversation get sort of pushed back a little bit. But the 1970s is that you've got directors who are incredibly well read and incredibly well educated at like Berkeley and doing the cinema programs and stuff like that with like the film school clique, as I've mentioned before, Lucas, De Palma, Scorsese, etc. These people were incredibly well read, partly because of the experience, the impressions of their families. Some of them, which I think is important, as immigrants as well, putting them into great schools, getting them very well educated, and in that getting them well read. And I think in the 1970s, the book and cinema are almost intertwined as one. Every great film is based off like a great book, and I think Coppola's filmography is undoubtedly heightened by that with Joseph Conrad's Hearts of Darkness, with Mario Puzo's the Godfather series. They brought the novel into the mainstream because they were educated on that aspect of well read with on the bibliography of probably the school programs they were on, but also because it was such a highbrow thing to probably the immigrant thing to try to learn English, and cinema's sort of like um, you know, quite not expensive, but sort of like not seen as such. There's no television, so it's constantly about reading. I think Scorsese has mentioned this as well about being incredibly well read, and they brought that sentiment in adapting novels that they felt like people need to see this as a movie. They broached the gap. The one thing which I mentioned before though about that is that every author of those books are mentioned undoubtedly within the credits or the advertisement. It's Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, but also Coppola took that on his own because of the fucking hell of a production. But it's like William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist, Mario Puzo's The Godfather, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I'm surprised you probably couldn't do it with Jaws. It's probably Christ that no one cut me down here. A lesser piece of work on the novel standard. But one thing changed is that those directors knew that they were adapting pieces of art. They were taking artistic merit and adapting them, and constantly made sure that those pieces of work were still maintained in the zeitgeist of being to be highlighted of the actual writer themselves. They were never left. They were always brought on the journey, and they were probably paid for that as well. And they were licensed, and they were paid adequately and probably responsibly and respectively with the bodies of work. The difference between the graphic novel is partly that because it's like a massive series. Like Stan Lee, yes, it's a big thing in the MCU, but I don't know what the is it Kang Dynasty, whatever that's based on. Nobody knows really in a predominantly like who even drew Batman, like Steve Ditko and Stan Lee. Stan Lee is this thing because he's still alive, and he sort of understood the fame, and the MCU brought him in it because it was like a gimmick. But you couldn't tell me who drew the Fantastic Four. You couldn't tell me where Iron Man 1 storyline or the Iron Man 3 Extremist storyline is indebted from. There's no intercontextuality or even contextuality of those series because A, they don't have to pay the fuckers, and B, I just don't think there's any respect for the material. I don't think they care. Every single comic book that they adapt should be credited if it's visual or narrative, and the residual should be paid to those comic book artists. There's a massive theory now that they're just not done. I know I'm rambling here, but I wanted to bring it back to the Jaws dot where I will do. But when you see you don't know like with like the Batman character, you just don't have any sensibility of like you feel that the modern day blockbuster is built by the people who are making them. It's not true. There are people in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s and go back to the 40s with Batman who drew these characters, and Superman especially. Like, it's not James Gunn's Superman. It's not fucking Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. Please. These are people who are vesseling these characters. They are taking them on and bringing them into a newfound audience. But it seems to me that the audience seem to forget that what the director's position is. They're just adapting this previous body of work, and nobody seems to want to give a shit anymore about where that work is from, because they can have it now, they can have it next week, and there's a TV show about it, and there's this and that. I'm not just highlighting the MCU, but I think predominantly with a blockbuster that's very much like that, but it is an issue of the MCU. When you go back to the 1970s, and granted, I'm sure that a lot of people weren't paid correctly, and I'm not to contradict myself earlier, but I'm sure that a few of people were forgotten about. But to me, it came from a respectable line of an artistic merit of, we'll adapt The Exorcist, but Blatty needs to write this with me. Blatty's name needs to be on the poster. Like, The Exorcist sells itself. You don't need William Peter Blatty is The Exorcist. You don't need Mario Puzo's The Godfather, and that's for Nick there for the pronunciation I butchered. You don't need that. You don't need Bram Stoker's Dracula. Dracula speaks for itself. But it comes from a different class of generational artistic directors who wanted to honour the previous artistic works that came before it. That's what worries me with the blockbuster going forward, and what worries with AI. Whereas when you look at Jaws and you see a director who we spoke about it, wasn't going to be made to be a blockbuster, it just happened, and we know it's based on a book, but it's a Spielberg thing, but the book's always mentioned. But when you look at the Godfather and The Exorcist and so on and so forth, there feels like we're going to grow together here. And have you ever read the Exorcist? It's based on the book. The book's terrifying. It travels with it. It grows and evolves with the film. The book will never be left behind. And I like that. I love that appreciation of not forgetting where it's from or the influence where it's built from. With what's happening now and how it's crafted, to me, I just don't think there's any intellectual property that's even admired. And I think even if you go on the Blockbuster, and I'm not going to name drop, but there's been another Matrix, like, they just don't seem to give a shit about the people who made them, the people who wrote them, and the people who envisioned them. Nobody seems to care anymore. And I think it's another aspect of Blockbuster, which I think when you look at these really natural, authentic pieces, there's to me, there's really a mass affection here. There really is an affection. I look at Jaws, I look at Star Wars, I look at The Exorcist, I look at these blockbusters we'll talk about, and like, I find a really warming aspect of it. We're all in this together. Art is art. We'll share it. You built us up. Let's take you on this journey. I just found it's at a loss now. I know that's very pessimistic, and I'm hoping you'll come in here and disagree with me and save it. Although I have a tingling feeling that you may agree with me here. I just think that we've lost this aspect of the blockbuster. Like, it's built on pre-existing foundations that just don't seem to just be highlighted anymore, which is really quite sad. And I can understand. I will hand it over. I'm sorry. I know that you just shut up, please let me talk. But Alan Moore, the graphic novel, the Watchmen V for Vendetta, like, can you not, like, he eviscerates anyone who adapts his work, and then when you granted, even the Wachowskis adapted his work, and he was like, I'm not going to watch it. I don't give a shit. Like, I remember the Watchmen came out, and Zack Snyder did an interview. Was like, "Oh, I wish Alan would just watch it in London." And he did an interview. Was like, "First of all, I don't fucking live in London, and B, I'll never watch your piece of shit adaptation." And I sort of understand that even while Alan Moore is alive, and I know he pushes back on it. Like, it's Zack Snyder's Watchmen. Like, it's just not. It's just V for Vendetta. It's Alan Moore. Without the iconography, especially in a graphic novel, and this is the issue with the MCU on a whole now, you wouldn't have a frame. You wouldn't have a frame. You would be lost. You wouldn't have a previous IP. You wouldn't have an industry that you built yourself on. So I think there's a massive loss of respect with how the Blockbuster evolved anyway. But I'll push it back onto you, because I feel like I don't want to upset anyone else who's listening now. Be like, oh, he's got nothing good to say.
No, I mean, if you watch the documentary, which if anyone at home is curious what we're talking about, I assume we're both talking about Making of Jaws, which is on the Blu-ray, I think, as an extra. I mean, the author is there for like the entire thing, giving his thoughts. He's right there with Spielberg and the cast and everyone. I don't think it's in the Blockbusters, it's abandoned. I do look at the 2000s, and we don't need to mention like the Harry Potter author, but like, she's there. You have, of course, our queen, Stephanie Meyer. Yeah, with Stephanie Meyer with Twilight. I do think it is existing in some. I think it was I forget her name, but the one who did the Hunger Games also.
Suzanne Collins,
generally Suzanne Collins. Yes, I think it's even bigger than just like not respecting the book. But just in general, I think people are so, like, when it comes to art, it's just so uninterested with where things came from and the respect towards them. I mean, you look at like The Exorcist, bringing it back, but like, do you really think David Gordon Green sat down and was like, I wonder what William Friedkin would do, or like what he would want out of this franchise? Like, no one cares. Do you think like with this new Matrix film, it's going to be like that? Like, it's like, continually, and you mentioned those also in your very long ramble. But it's just, I think it's speaking to a larger thing in culture, but you absolutely can pinpoint that and see that with how people are treating. I mean, even like what Scott Pilgrim just had the new Netflix series. Does anyone talk about like the original? Like, I just think it's definitely there. It's undeniably there, which is depressing. But I think it's even more depressing how that speaks to such a larger idea, I guess, in like culture and content. Um,
Well,
Harsh,
they'd
but
also you'd have to pay them residuals. I genuinely think
yeah,
economics comes down to it. I just don't think anyone's seen a dime from it. Like you have the Blair Witch people now. Like we saw this film and it made the studio like millions. I think it's the highest grossing and comparative to its budget to make it box office. And they've never seen any retrospective residuals. That to me is absolutely disgusting. And I think the same issue that we're going to have in the next few weeks is that a lot of these blockbusters. Granted, some of them are very interesting original IPs based on artistic versions of what these creators want to put on the screen. I think it's fabulous. But when we talk about stuff that's pre-based, I think we're going to find very complicated relationships. I can just feel this happening now where there's going to be a lot to talk about with the adaptions. I feel that there's going to be a lot to sort of realize, oh, this is based on this is based on a manga, etc., etc. You know, and I do think there's so much stuff now because it's saturated. It just gets lost in the news. But like you said, like it used to be a point where the auteur used to take precedent, and it was like, well, Kubrick maybe an auteur, but Kubrick's identification of what made a good script was taking someone else's and revitalizing it to his own merit. You know, Spielberg, Coppola, George Lucas to a degree with looks at like a lot of Kurosawa stuff, and De Palma. I mean, Christ, I'm surprised De Palma never got copyrighted intellectual copyright from Hitchcock, but that's cinema. They can get away with that. But I do think that this 1970s, these blockbusters, very early on. Granted, it's hard to have this conversation because at the time they weren't blockbusters. So I'm trying to like retroactively say it and then contextually understand the conversation as well. So I do apologize if I'm confusing anyone, if not myself. But it's interesting that these people brought this newfound cinematic foray, but identified what built it. Now, I don't know. I just think that we're in such a greedy industry. It's like, oh, if we like, you know, shit, if we actually say Susan Collins is on it, like that'd be good. It'd be good. But I don't really want to pay her. Like, oh yeah, shit,
we're
yeah,
in such a greedy
yeah.
world. I mean, everything though is about this, and maybe it was. I wasn't alive in the 1970s, so maybe I'm romanticizing it quite a bit. I'm sure I am, but like every single thing now is just about like how few people can we get attached because we want to make the most money as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And if we add even another person in any regard, it is going to be like I just even think like it's so frustrating. Like everything is understaffed because they don't want to staff the right amount of people because they want to have the bare minimum every single thing, not to sound like, you know, Jakob and be like an old guy who's like, oh God, everything sucks now. But like it's every single thing. But in art, it's getting very concerning. In AI, I don't know, AI is going to be very interesting. And it's the whole conversation already is like with AI baffling
Yeah,
at
I mean,
times. But
what's grown out of that as well is like this influx of cameos, like
oh
watching that
yeah.
stupid Chris Evans movie with I can't, is it Anna de Armas, isn't it? Dexter Fletcher did it. It was on Apple TV. I could
Oh,
not.
Ghosted.
Yeah, like you've got like random people just turning up in it, and then you've got like Fall Guy where you've got like Chris Evans and then like Ryan Reynolds, and you've got like more cameos, and it just feels like this weird thing of like we want him in here, and we'll know it'll sell after the fact, so and we won't have to pay him. We'll just like he might just do it as a deal or get it off his contract. And I'm like partly just sat there like, how has nobody clocked onto this? Like you're just getting him in to like satisfy.
Enough to make a TikTok. You know,
Yeah,
that's Deadpool. Deadpool and Wolverine is just going to be enough to where you can make a TikTok about anything and it's going to work well. But anything greater than that is not going to be good. It's fascinating. Jenny Nicholson, a YouTuber, just made a whole video on the Star Wars hotel they had, and that was like the
oh
thesis
god,
of the hotel with experiences and why it failed. Is everything was designed to be the bare minimum to where you can make a TikTok and show that there's stuff there, but there wasn't enough to actually do. Like everything though is with that to where you just want enough to where it's there and it creates that 15-second clip of, oh,
yeah.
we have Taylor Swift or whatever. But not actually have the substance there, which is just like, I don't know, it sucks.
Yeah, it's like when you look at this and you compare it, I just look at the writing. I'm like, this has character. I know it's been parodied so many times. Like, I mean, Always Sunny in Philadelphia does a really good job of it with Charlie Day, where the Robert Shaw thing, where like when he's on the nail board, the chalkboard with the nails. Sorry, it's like there's just so much like iconography here in simplicity to just take the scene down. And one thing we spoke about it where not ironically enough, this has a bite. This is still like really quite gripping as well. Like there's quite a lot of emotional um, texture here. Like when Alex dies and his mom it comes to like see them and she's dressed all in black and she slaps him. Like there's like life and death here. Like there's people which makes the sequel even more interesting. That like with the paranoia and the PTSD of it. I have like my own thesis about that. I wish they never shown a shark in that film and left it up to interpretation because I think it has so much more texture, evolution to this. But you have a guy wanting to do the right thing, and there's crazy people around him who are like, yeah, we should do this. But the actual people who've got the authority to do it are not interested because of economic greed. And the irony of that is the situation we're currently in within the context of medium of cinema is like baffling. It's almost like ironic to a point of like, oh, even like who's writing this in real time? Like this is bullshit. But this has so much. This has so many good sequences of just two people just sat there. Like the iconography, like we're going to need a bigger boat when it just comes up for air and it goes back down. You son of a bitch when it blows up. You know, the scene where he's at like the little tiny sequence where he's pissed up on the bottle of wine because the mayor has said like, well, this continues no matter what, and his son Alex is like copying him eating the food, and like he realizes in that moment, like, you know, there's certain people who may not have that. You know, the Alex's mom should never have that with him again, and like, you know, there's a heartedness to that where it's really lovable, and then there's a realization of like he needs to go after and kill this fucking thing because otherwise that he may not have that, and ironically enough in the franchise and kill them both off weirdly enough, but yeah, it just has pause and reflect, and I always really like that in a film where it can cut the shit, pause just momentarily, and have a moment where just to take it in and just have it's very difficult to do within genre because if you've got an action-packed feature and you do it, you can have issues of pacing, feel out of place. It can take the tone out. But a very good calculated director can put these sequences and you just take it out, and it's really really beautiful to see. And Spielberg's a master of doing this anyway. I think he does it throughout multiple sequences. Spielberg's in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like, where does it hurt? Here, and he touches his like here for his lips and the kiss. It's really like wonderful intimate sequences, but it's pause, reflect. I always use that terminology because I think it tries to sort of like identify the moments. But if you think of any great movie that you like personally, I always find that I can find one of them in there. The one in the Matrix, right, is where Neo's fighting Agent Smith, and you have this massive sequence. He said it. He said it. But there's a sequence where he fights Agent Smith, right, and he gets shot, and it's this really pivotal emotional sequence, and he's dying, and then in the background, right, you in the actuals on the ship on the Nebuchadnezzar, the monsters, the Sentinels are destroying the ship, getting into him, and all the music cuts out to a very minimal, and we just have the diegetic, we have non-diegetic sound, and we just have Trinity speak to him and say like, you've got to be you've got to survive, because when we went to go visit the Oracle, she told me that I'd fall in love with the one, and it's like this really wonderful moment, just pause, intimacy, everything gets lost in the moment, and we just focus on two characters. And it's a reminder of why we're there as an audience, because we give a shit about character. I want to see these people evolve. I want to see them as human beings. And in any great movie, it does it. In any great, fabulous movie, you can get a really good director or writer, in fact, but primarily it comes from a director point of view, just to just strip it back And Jaws has so many great moments of that. In fact, you could probably point out 4 or 5. The sequence where Robert Shaw's on the nail board, that's 1. The Indianapolis sequence on the boat, that's 2. We're going to need a bigger boat, that's 3. And then again, him and his son eating tea together. Like, there's loads of really good little, just calm it down. We all know what's there. We all know what's out there. But what matters is these characters fundamentally are going to have to make decisions. So there's a really good craft here as well with the directors. It's not just an explosive blockbuster. I do find it's one of those features where there's actually a really good story here as well. And Fury Road's another one. That's a great one about intimate moments. Watched that a few weeks ago where the old lady gets a neck cut and she sits there and she's got the film just completely forgets about everything and just sits with her, and she just sit there. She knows she's going to die, and in a bag she just gets her seeds. That just has no reason to be in that film, but it's just so intimate, so textured, just so emotive. This film's it's just sprinkled with those moments. It's perfection. I mean, it's hard to say, but it really is one of his better directed films as well. It just has absolutely everything in a filmography that's like packed full of really great movies. It really does have everything. Like it's on Jurassic Park level of being entertainment value and also being like spectacle and scale and intimate. Really sort of genuinely like heartfelt feature, like E.T. Like he's a fabulous filmographer, fabulous director. But this is like just to show the signs, man. The guy was so ahead of his time. It's so good to go back and watch this and eat such good fucking food, honestly.
And it's that human, it's that substance. I mean, we talk on this podcast a lot about smaller cinema and the power of cinema and the connections you can make in cinema. And I think sometimes people, especially modern times, gets it confused that a blockbuster can't have that. And this
Mm-hmm.
film has that humanity, has that substance. This week I read this book, It Came from the Closet, which is a bunch of queer individuals reflecting on their favorite horror movies and what they see in horror from a queer lens. And they have a whole bit on Jaws. And this writer shares a very personal reflection of Jaws under a queer lens.
Oh
And just like
wow.
I always love when films have that substance, that humanity, to where you can connect in that way, to where someone could feel empowered in their sexuality due to Jaws. And I mean, it's a very interesting read. I'd recommend the entire book. I was going to mention it during my rapid reviews, but I think you don't have to, because the film is super popular or because it's action or because it's horror or it has suspense or it has a big shark in it. You don't have to forego the base level of why we love cinema, which is that emotional connection and that power. And I think Jaws is just such a fantastic example of all these different elements working at such a high level, whether it's the thrills, the special effects, the entertainment, the characters, the dialogue, any area you want to view filmmaking from. Jaws has it, and it's operating at such a perfect level, to where it's memorizing. And I can see why all these years after release, it still is so popular. It still is such an important film that gets re-released, and people go see it. Did really good on this recent re-release from what I
Mm-hmm.
saw. And why it's still with us and why we're still talking about it. I think it's a really, even in the context of the series, which we're watching some films I think are very good, I think Jaws is probably going to be a gem that floats near the top of the surface, because I just think it's really quite special.
Yeah, 50 years old next year as well. 50 years old, and I think I have a Blu-ray of this. I don't have a 4K of it. I'd love to see this in the cinema again if it gets re-released next year. I imagine it will do. And I can't wait to hear and see this in a cinema screen, because it's one of those few times where everything is elevated to a point where everything seems to work. And it's like the James Bond franchise had a very similar thing where they got the guy to play him, Connery. They got a great book series to play it on, and they got John Barry to do the soundtrack with the famous like James Bond theme tune. It's eerily similar here, where they have the same thing. They have a really good cast. They have a really good Ian Fleming with a Bond, of course, but here with the actual book itself, you have a Spielberg behind the camera, and you have John Williams as a score. It's hard to get like that quintet of like everything just seemingly working, because there's a lot of stuff when you see it recently, and we do, because we questioned Westborn Kingdom last week, and maybe we shouldn't have done, but it is difficult to look at the amalgamation of a piece of cinema and see how it all fits together until you actually watch it. Because when you look at like Jaws now, and it's like Spielberg, yes, John Williams, yes, based on like a book, like okay, and then it's got like that cast list. You think, oh wow, like it feels premeditated, but in actual content it's being making, it's all still a massive risk, and it is risky for Universal to do it. It's risky that they allowed him to continue it, because now that wouldn't happen. He would have been replaced. He would have been fired, or if not, another director would have come in. What sort of puts more emphasis on my point of them not thinking this was going to be a blockbuster is they didn't bring someone to do it, because they'd have brought Frankenheimer in, or they'd have brought someone old school to run the course behind him at least. And granted, there's probably stories out there to suggest such if the producers came on set. It's been very much a lovey-dovey conversation because it did very well. But in a different world, I can see Mr. Spielberg getting pushed to one side and a John Frankenheimer
That's why
coming
he
in
didn't.
here. Hmm.
That's why he didn't leave the island
Yeah.
when they took breaks from filming. He never left the island because he said, "If I leave this island, there's no way I'm coming back to it with this job. So I'm just never leaving set."
It is such like
Wild.
again, like I hate to use it, but it is such a lightning in a bottle. It is, because it wouldn't happen today for multiple reasons. It probably wouldn't be anywheres thoughtful, thematic, or poignant now. Like it is such an I'm not going to contradict some about The Exorcist, but it is such a pivotal moment to it be the blockbuster, because not only is it universally accepted for quite a large quantity of audience, but it is like the perfect institution to start it, because it just gets everything wildly right. And I'm glad that Jaws is the one. I'm glad it's not something that's obscure, because when you look at like the CGI, it's the Last Starfighter. No one knows the fucking Last Starfighter. Nobody's seen that film. And then I'm just glad it's this. I'm glad that we have a start where we can look back on something, and it has a relatively really good history. It's still very much lauded for its practicality. It didn't feel like it cheated anyone. It didn't feel like it did cult status. It came out of a very difficult rocky relationship and just blossomed. And I think it's one of those very rare stories in cinema. Like, I mean, Christ, we do this every week now when we talk about stories, if it's on Slack but when we talk on Twitter or just talk personally, but especially on the podcast as well. Not a lot goes right anymore. Not a lot gets right. Not a lot goes the way that people intended it to, and it comes out and it doesn't do very well, and it's not made very well. It's not shot very well. It's being ridiculed before release, or it's being made sloppy. If you look at the Doolittle thing with Robert Downey Jr., or you look at the Justice League, they shouldn't be released when they're released, and the CGI is not right, and it takes a step back all the time, and it's so very rare to get a feature that's born out of such hellfire, and it to have such a really really good relationship on screen and for an audience, and it has aged really really well. I know we keep on saying it, but like it still frightens me. Which for a film that's 50 years old next year is a testament to its youth. I mean, like, I don't want to go in deep water. Robert Shaw still scares the shit out of me. I don't really like going on boats like that anyway because of the water, but I've done multiple times. I actually broke my arm on a boat like this in America a few years ago. We'll get to that story on a different conversation, I'm sure. But it's interesting that this has so much weight. I'm really glad to have been able to talk about this, because I don't know how you feel about this, right? But I find it difficult to look at a piece of work knowing it has sequels. I know that Lord of the Rings has the Hobbit trilogy, and I usually, as sort of a completionist, but I'm quite like straightforward with it. Like, I have to, like, I know that there's we have the Sam Raimi Spider-Man. We have another two, then we have another three. I know that there's like a franchise there. I don't really like stop and like, oh, that doesn't exist to me. That's non-canon. Like the Alien franchise, I'll watch all of them because to me that this is a franchise. I'll be honest with you, right? With Jaws, it's the only one I can think of where I don't really care to sort of acknowledge the sequels because I never grew up with them. I only watched The Revenge. I mean, I only watched Jaws 3D like a couple of years ago for the podcast that Uncut Gems did about the sequels, which anyone should go out and listen to that because I've got like I was meant to do the show of that, and then I was in a lay-by lane outside Suffolk, and I did like an hour of it. I went on and on and on. Yeah, like granted, that's what I do. But it's interesting because people have a relationship with those films and I don't. And as a franchise, I don't know. I was just going to ask you about this. Watching Jaws, watching the documentary, was there anything about you that thought, I know you've said about 3D, right? I know you've said that. but you don't want to watch the completionist here, do you? Like, you just don't. Like, it's so self-sufficient. It's so like, it's so wholeheartedly. It's like soul food. You don't need any excess shit with this. I don't need to go eat some noodles afterwards. I don't need to have like a snack or supper with it. It's so self-sufficient that 3D, which like Dennis Quaid's in that as well, and Leah Thompson's in that as well, which is strange. Then you have like The Revenge. I just don't care for them at all, and it's a very secluded relationship because, like I said before, I have to watch everything. But I just wondered if it's the same for you.
Yeah, I mean, I have no interest in 2 or 4 especially. I mean, 3D I'll probably check out once every, like, 5-ish years maybe just for something, but, I don't really have any interest even in that one. I mean, it helps that they're all, like, shit, right? Like, let's just be honest, they're all bad.
Yeah,
So, like, it's not even like, "Oh, I don't need a snack after this beautiful 5-course meal." It's like, after I leave the restaurant, I don't need to go dig in the dumpster and find a piece of moldy fruit, right? So, like,
yeah.
that helps undeniably with it, but, no, I have no interest in the sequels, to be honest.
Which is crazy because it's not a symbiotic relationship. It doesn't need them either. It doesn't need
Oh,
them. They're all relatively singular in their approach, although they are interconnected
yeah,
in more ways. But it's interesting that it spawned something where and it does go to show that the ingredients are really what matters, because you can have the same
yeah,
approach for the others, and you do need them. And it's interesting that when we watch a franchise now in the Blockbuster, and you have other directors take it on, it is really a monumental task. I don't think people sort of give that a much of the highlight, because like we've done The
yeah,
Exorcist, and Christ, we've done that. But it's interesting that when you look at these films and people take them on themselves, it very much is an artistic way. You've got a director and a
yeah,
writer's got to really interest, because I always find it interesting to have seen Scorsese's Godfather 3, because that to me is like that's a film where Scorsese would have tried to have been like Coppola, but Coppola made a Scorsese Godfather movie, especially the original cut, not necessarily Coda. But when you look at this, it's such a Spielberg thing, and I do love the fact that like it just, even in dire moments of like, I don't want to be here, I'm gonna get fired, on screen is like still this entity. He sacrificed. Granted, he didn't go to war for anyone. He didn't give us peace and freedom or anything. Well, maybe he did in Blockbuster territory, but he sacrificed his unhappiness for perhaps 2 years to just make a really good film. Now it had just been snapped off and sold off for insurance. Like, let's just give it to Netflix. There's a lot to talk about here. A lot of very much thematic ripples in the Blockbuster era, and because I've gone on for a while, but so I imagine you want to bring it down a bit. But it is unprecedented, the influence this has, the ripples of what if. I'll ask you, just because my final question here is, I'm going to say this now. If this doesn't find an audience, A, what happens to the Blockbuster, and B, does Spielberg have a career?
I think the Blockbuster is an interesting question because that's a really huge, like, what if, because I don't think it blows up in the same way it does. I think for sure Spielberg does not have, well, I think like, well, a career. I think Spielberg takes a lot longer to blow up. I think he has the talent to where I think he would eventually find his path
Mm-hmm.
probably. I definitely, obviously though, not as rapidly with just like success as he does. But I think the Blockbusters, I mean, it's always been around. It's always been a thing. So I think it would find its way. But again, I think the success of Jaws expedites both Spielberg's rise and the age of the blockbuster
Mm-hmm.
quite hugely.
See, my approach is slightly different. Not to be cynical here, but I think the Blockbuster happens regardless, because I think cinema is just growing into a monumental thing. I think Star Wars happens no matter what, because of how weird it is. A director understands the pre-existing notion about like Japanese cinema, and especially like John Carter and stuff like that, taking stuff from stuff into intercontextuality, and putting it together and making his space opera. I think this the excuse me, especially with how sci-fi is going as well. I think the Blockbuster is inevitable. Would have Star Wars done as well? Probably not, because I think that, like you said, you still need an audience to be like, shit, what was that? What's next? That second one is always the interesting one. It's like, oh shit, here we go. Like, this is, what's this? So without Jaws, with Star Wars being the first, I think it would be a lesser blockbuster, but I still think it would be a blockbuster. I think with Spielberg, I don't think we have a Spielberg, because if I look at his filmography here, Jaws doesn't do very well. He doesn't make Close Encounters next. No way, because they wouldn't give it to Dreyfuss because Jaws didn't perform very well. So that would have been miscast. Although I did want Steve McQueen for that, which he should have done. But again, Spielberg bottling it. What a thing! What a thing to even think. So forget about Close Encounters, right? What do you have next? 1941, which we've done on the podcast before, and I hate the film. That destroys a career in its own right. He only got back after that with Raiders as well, but without Raiders, without Star Wars with Lucas, it's all connected here. It does the Star Wars sequels get fast tracked? Yes, but then does Lucas perhaps not want to write Raiders if he doesn't have a relationship with Spielberg after Jaws, so on and so forth? So I think the ripples here are gigantic, utterly gigantic. But I don't think Spielberg has the career he does now, in context of Jaws not doing well. But I do think the blockbuster, like you said, I think it's inevitable. I just think the growth of it, I just think it's just going to blow up. But I'm glad that we got Spielberg. You know, I'm glad it didn't happen to someone like, oh God, maybe I shouldn't say something like that. But let's say this: I'm glad that it happened to someone who adored cinema. It gave someone a platform, like let's just make movies for audiences, and not necessarily someone who was like, yeah, give me $20 million and I'll make a movie, and then just like tap out, which like Taika Waititi. I didn't say that. Who said that? Stop.
I
No.
think Nick was on the call or something.
Yeah,
That's
that's
weird.
weird, because I just saw that Sean Levy Free Guy clip about him elevating a screenplay, and I was like, want to die every time that's on. I actually think, do you know what? I think that's the worst thing I've ever seen. That clip about, like, that's the worst thing I've ever seen. I find it utterly repugnant. I find it irresponsible that's on the internet. I say this without any being hyperbolic. I find that one of the worst things mankind have ever done. And you read that as you will, and I genuinely think, seriously, it's one of the worst things I've ever seen. But I'm glad that, to reiterate beforehand about Spielberg, I'm really glad that it was like the springboard for a director who not necessarily deserved it, but had a plan of, like, I'm going to make really good cinema. There's so much positivity with Jaws, so much
I mean, he
positivity.
kept going. He kept
He
like
didn't
I don't know.
stop.
Look at modern context. How many filmmakers, and I've ranted about this before on the podcast, but like how many filmmakers will get a big shot and then will just like abandon everything they've ever done and just make shit and shit
Yep.
and shit. Like Spielberg. I mean, say all you want about him as a director, and you can probably say plenty, but like from then until now, like continually is putting out good efforts, inspired efforts. He's putting in effort, which is just something in film you don't always see.
Yes.
I think you have to, like, at the very least respect Spielberg, and at the very least just say like he's probably one of the greatest voices in film when it comes to effort, when it comes to just continually trying to push the form, because he loves it, because he loves filmmaking,
Yep.
because he loves cinema, he loves the struggle, he loves the process, he loves that, and he doesn't lose that, which is just, it's just, I don't know, it feels so obvious. It feels like obviously that's what someone would do in that position. But throughout history of film, over and over and over again, we see people who do not follow that path. So I mean, yeah, it couldn't happen to probably a better person.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've said enough about Spielberg on these podcasts before, especially ClapperCast, but I'm sure I've said some horrible things on Gems. But I think it's a director who is very much like. It's interesting when you look at him, because how he's evolved with practical effects to very early FX with Jurassic Park, and then really gone into it with the likes of Tintin. Like he sets precedents at an age where, like, you've got Tarantino, like, I'm going to do 10 and that's it. I mean, Hitchcock, like, went on and on and on. That there are directors you could say that maintain the status quo. Then there are directors like, yeah, I want to push this. Ridley Scott, Spielberg. I hope Nolan pushes it still. And I think Villeneuve, for our Emmy Award winning fan there, But yeah, these are directors who, with age, are going to grow into it. But not so, others not so much than the newcomers, but there are filmographies that now are going to have to evolve with the times of CGI and AI and stuff like that. And I think for Spielberg to be like at 76 or 78, but like I want to make a musical. People are like, what? Like, just go make a Tintin. He's like, no, I've always wanted to make a musical. And he said this when Minority Report came out. It's like, I want to make a musical, and he was going to do one. I think in 2004, and I think he did War of the Worlds instead. Like, that's the director's pushing himself. And I don't like musicals, but that is a monumental achievement for a director who's got an artistic merit, who just loves that. And Ridley Scott, going back to Alien Covenant, like a Prometheus, I don't care what other people want. I want to make that film. I'm going to push through with the sets and stuff like that. And you've got him making Napoleon. He's going to do Cormac McCarthy next. Like we've definitely got an interesting generational gap between. That's what worries me as well, right? Because you've got a generational gap of the old generation seemingly want to evolve, and then you have a newer generation, and they're happy. They're just happy of churning out shit with sprinkles on, and it's so depressing. Like you said, it's anticlimactic. It's underwhelming. Like I watched a New Zealand filmmaker who I've already said his name. I'm not going to give him the power anymore because he'll turn up. But like watching The Hunt for the Wilder People and stuff like that, and then Boy and uh and seeing a director who, like, had a voice and then made a Marvel movie. I'm like, oh, that's pretty good, subverting it, and then like is now making Time Bandits for Apple TV. I'm just thinking like, what happened? Like, you had such an interesting voice that rose above ethnicity and culture, that carried that way and had those stories, and like you made like Jojo Rabbit and shit. And I'm like, I don't know. I think people get lost with the idea of, like, someone gives them a bag of money, like, what do you want to make? And the ideas run rampant, and you forget about what you actually want to do because you've got the opportunity to go make anything you want to. I think blockbusters are very detrimental into that. And
I'll tell you who'll be interesting as Gerwig, and I know we talked
oh,
about that
I was gonna
previously,
bring
but
this up. Yeah.
especially after Barbie, it's just you can continue. But I think that's going to be a very interesting pathway forward with this Chronicles of Narnia next.
Oh,
I'm curious.
we spoke about that when they did the podcast, and me and Max disagreed about this. Max and Vincent, right? I still wholeheartedly agree with that. Why the fuck is she doing a Narnia movie? Like, she made Lady Bird. Like, make independent features that, like, talk about generational trauma, talk about societal things, talk about gender. Why feel the need? Granted, she's got a shitload of money, and she'll have a producing credit of it, and she'll get in with Netflix. And granted, like it's monumental for a female from director. I don't want to take that away from her, but there are negatives that come with that, and I think that's a massive issue I've got. First and foremost, who's going to watch that exactly, and B, who's interested, answers your first question. I just find it, like, very strange why someone of that artistic creativity would want to do that. But granted, if the opportunity's there, why as a New Zealand born filmmaker who has a really interesting voice, would you want to adapt Time Bandits, that was already made as a cult classic by an incredibly gifted filmmaker, by Terry Gilliam, who can't get a film made today? That to me is a generational gap of pissing on someone, pissing in a bottle, and someone's on fire. It's like, either way, you're shitting on something that's come before it. I don't know where I was going with that analogy, but there'll be something connected there. But I just think that, we've this generational. No, I'm going to sound like not such an old bastard during this podcast. I am 28, people. I'm not 58. Okay, I'm not. I don't want to sound like I'm, like, really really pessimistic. But the generational gap we have now is so different with the ethics of filmmaking. Is because, why make something unique when you and try very desperately to get it made, than make something that's $200 million that everyone's seen? I don't know. That's where we're at, and that's the blockbuster now. And that ultimately, within this 2 hours, what we've done, we are going to get to a point where we're going to get grated. I'm going to get tired. I'm going to get bored. And in the space of 50 years, That's 5 decades. So ultimately, there'll be at least a movie in each decade. You've got 5 films. 5 films. Think about that. From Jaws to now, there's 5 films where we're going to find a downhill that is going to plateau. And I'm very interested in your list because I know which one. If I see them, I know which one it'll be straight away. But I'm so interested to find that where this comes from, where this generational thing ends, where the money comes through. It's got to be late 90s, early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s as well, and that sort of range. But going back to Jaws, it's just 5 decades. We've changed so much from the blockbuster. This is a question then. Not to be pessimistic, not to be downtrodden. Think about positives. The evolution. Have we got better, or do you think it's been a decline then for the blockbuster? I know that's such a multifaceted thing, but
Well, I mean, I just feel like the answer. It's going to be a decline. I mean, I think I don't want to be like there's nothing good because there undeniably
yes,
is a lot that is good, and we will cover on this podcast things I think that are very good throughout the series. But like when you look at the entirety of film, the entirety of the blockbuster, I think it's quite hard to look at like what's happening in the 70s, look what's happening in the 2010s or the 2020s, and say it's anything but a decline. But I mean, I don't know. Like, when you look at this, do you see Jaws versus like Deadpool and Wolverine? Right? Like, I don't know. Is there any argument that we're going up? Like, I don't know. What are we
well,
doing? Right?
when you did the reboot, ironically for the ClapperCast, you had a discussion with me, and you were like, "I want to do old films." You didn't want to do the cycle of the new film every week, and your reason this not to speak for you, but you wanted to go back to what was good. When we do when we do ClapperCast, and we do the regular sort of showings, and we do the Kingdom of Planet Apes, and we do Oppenheimer. There's very rarely a unanimous thing where we are like, "This was amazing." So rarely where the blockbuster is like, "Oh my god, like we're here." Where we've got excitement in the last, and when since the inception of this podcast, the excitement we've got, and granted, we're very two personally similar type of motifs of cinema, so it comes from a place of probably of one sidedness. But like we talked about like the John Waters stuff, that's what we got excited for, and I've never really seen that stuff, and I don't think you had either. And they were like, "Oh shit, this is amazing." And then we when we did like the festival unit, and we'd like Kajillion Air. Do you remember that with and we were like, "Oh shit, like this is like."
Love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
When's the last time that you saw something on a level of that impressed you as Jaws? It, 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 it's multifaceted, so don't get me wrong, and it's such an easy conversation to say no on. But we have spoke about so much of it. We go on for like 9 hours, but you said yourself, like, you know what the answer is because it's such a saturated market. The generational gap is that I just don't think people are making films for people anymore. They're making it for 10-second TikToks, like you said yourself.
Yeah.
I think the artistic merit, I think people don't care about what they make anymore because of the economics of it. I think because of that, the audience stagnates and like, well, I need to spend my money here. You know, cinema tickets where I live are £5. I'm not going to cheap out
Right.
£5, but even then, you know, I could put £45 in my car, or I could go watch 2 movies and put 35 in my car. And I don't have any
Yeah.
kids. I live alone. I am married, but but I'm not like a lonely old man, don't worry. I don't want to make it sound like and I live alone, and I just, I love movies or anything like that.
I have Jaws. I have the
Yeah, I
Matrix.
have Jaws, I have Spielberg. I'm going to watch the open mat version of Alexander after this because I need to get cinema. But no, I just think there's just more decisions to make, and I think with that lack of decisions from Hollywood and more decisions from the audience, where Hollywood would think that they would prosper, I don't know. And the irony of the blockbuster is that they made more of them on such a saturated level that the audience could then be like, I don't need to watch that. You've got too much of it. I'm not going to watch any of it. And then shot themselves in the foot. And it's just that case of everyone got greedy and just really got high off their own supply. But it is one of those things to just go back to Jaws and be like, this shit's so simple. and
Yeah.
to really just enjoy the simplicity of it. And
I mean, I think, like, let's be clear. There is, like, I'm sure if we had a podcast where every single week we reviewed, like, the calendar releases of 1970, whatever, like, I'm sure a lot of it sucks. So
yeah,
I do want to be clear, like, we are looking at that, but I'll compare it to this. What the podcast was at one point was a very big concern of, like, we need to do all the new movies. We need to do
yes,
multiple movies. We need to bring in as many guests as possible. There was an ideology surrounding we need to do the most as possible to try to get clicks and try to get popular. I
yes,
always like talking on the podcast, but that was an era of the podcast. The era now, where it's much lesser, it's much simpler, but we're cherry picking what we do and we're doing things that excite me. Even if I don't love all the films, right? I'm excited to talk about
yes,
Almodovar. I'm excited to talk about Waters. I'm excited to talk about Varda. I'm excited to talk about even the new releases. They have a purpose for being there. It's not just this random film is coming out, so we have to do the Fall Guy. No, I want to talk about how Planet of the Apes is continuing because I like that series and such. I will say this is, for me, much more of a rewarding experience as it was back then, right? So there is something to be said
yes.
about simpler, more engaging,
Look,
such.
I would say this to you off podcast, and I will say this to you on it here, and I would say this about you to other people as well. This is good, Dora. I'm not going to shit on you. That would be such a horrible thing to do. But you are very lucky, right? And I don't want this to sound soppy or sentimental, right? I'm not. I'm just trust me where this is going. You have realised very early on. I think a lot of people don't do it, and I think I've had this conversation with myself a lot, and I know Nick has. I know that Jakub has as well, and ironically, we're all very close. So, but we're all different generations. We're all from different places over the planet, but we've all come to a very similar decision. I think you have on this podcast primarily is that you took back your relationship with cinema and you explored cinema at what you liked and what you want to do. And you didn't let the release dates and the schedules and studios dictate to you what you should be seeing and not. And it's an element that's changing now, and audiences are dictating who regardless is in the film, who it's made by. If they're not interested in it, they won't watch it. Simple as that. And yes, Netflix is making like 162 people watching A Mother by Jennifer Lopez. Yeah, it's background noise, please. Like, please, like I've done what I've watched it. It was terrible. You know, Atlas. No chance. Maybe, but no, not really. But we now have again about that saturation thing, the option, and I think cinema. People seem to forget this, and it's strange, but it's been here 100 years. James Whale, Oscar Michaud, like, go watch the 30s trendsetters. Please to God, go fucking watch Orson Welles and be like, that guy invented modern day cinema and a technique of using cinema as a practice to get through you and the story. Go watch this early Spielberg stuff. Go watch Spielberg in general. Watch the Coppola. Watch the 1970s. People are so much premeditated now to want to watch the brand new things that come out in the cinema, regardless if it's going to be something that you like or whatever. It's just I'll go watch that. I'll go watch that. And I did this. I did this ages ago. I used to watch 4 showings a day every Saturday morning off, and I used to go like 3 days in the week to go watch movies and stuff. And I'd watch shit. I'd be like, oh, you'd watch stuff like Only You, the Josh O'Connor thing I watched. We talked about the other day on Challenges. I found that like a limited screen. I really enjoyed it. But I was watching like The Informer with Joel Kinnaman. Like, what the fuck was I doing that for? Like, in a double screening. Like, what was I doing? Why would I do that? What was it like? I was watching Ip Man 4 and The Gentleman back to back. And I was like, why am I doing this? And I think you have to find yourself is that we often forget the vast pond, the vast ocean, and not to go back to that Joker review, which I think you mentioned with the Megalopolis review, which is quite fun. And to bring it back to that is that um, a drop in a trickle of water in a pond has massive ripples, but a drop in an ocean, the magnitude's never felt. And I think, and I've upscaled that for whoever that reviewer was, but I think cinema is very similar in that you've just taken like the ownership back and be like, actually, I don't give a shit about like watching a new release, and there's nothing wrong with that. You'll find it eventually, but I'll let time dictate that. I'll see how that evolves in time, and I'll go back to a film like next few years and see if I like it, and then if not, because someone might make something else and make something else, and you go back to it, etc. But John Waters has waited enough, you know. Jaws has not has waited long enough, But Pedro Almodovar, there's a director who's waited long enough for someone to talk about his films, and I think the stuff that you've been doing as well, and what Gems does, I think in particular Gems, because they go back and look at a lot of older stuff, random shit. But they did Time Cop, and I was like, I've never watched John Van Damme. My dad hates him, and fuck it, I watched it today, and I liked it. I thought it was fun. And I've been watching like just stuff where I've been given time to things that were forgotten, and time to stuff where I was so preoccupied with watching an MCU movie in like 2008. I'm like, I didn't get to see this. I don't know. I feel like you've done the same way, and I'm glad because I think a lot of people, and I will never name names here ever ever ever. But you just go on Twitter and Letterboxd, and I think there's people who orchestrate their viewing ships to that. And I don't get like sad about it, but I often think like, you're a very good reviewer. This other person's got very good instincts. I'd love to know what you think about The Keep, Michael Mann's movie. I'd love to know what you think about, like a random movie like the shit I watch. I follow a guy called Jonathan Vaza, right? I don't know him. The guy, I believe it's a man, so I'll just say them just in case. But like, watch the most random of shit, and I found them because I was watching Black History Month that we decided to do in February. Something I wouldn't have done. I was watching like Across the 110th Street, which was amazing. Shaft and stuff like that. Getting a really good education about black cinema exploitation. Richard Roundtree, Pam Grier, who is a goddess. Like I Pam Grier, everyone, wow. And I never would have seen those films, but they were watching like the most random stuff, and I found them. Like, I just can't wait to what the review next. Same with you, same with Nick, same with Jakob and Randy and Max and yeah,
Hillary.
and Hillary. Hillary's like I have to block Hillary's out sometimes because Hillary watches the most random of shit, and I'm like, where have you found that? And I look it up, and I'm like 1 star Hillary, like, where has she seen that from? Everyone for London at 33, definitely. But these people that I find so interesting to talk about older films and stuff, and to just get an insight, because we live at different parts of the planet, right? Your experience growing up, we spoke about this, is different to mine. Where we live, what we look like, we're different. I'm fascinated. We like the same stuff, but I'm always fascinated about what your story dictates of how you see something. I find that fascinating, and that's for everybody. And the fact that we did Aldomovar, and we had a conversation about bad education, about queerness, and especially John Waters as well, when Nick came on. I find that fascinating to talk about, and I love that, and I love the direction this has taken. And the Blockbuster is one of those conversations to, like, when you found Jaws, your relationship of early cinema was very different to mine, and I find it fascinating. I just don't think we have those conversations, because I don't know if I will end this in a second, but just to go back to the thing you were talking about, someone on Twitter posted this. I can't remember who, but I thought it was really interesting. People were damning Coppola's new movie, and I'm not going to talk about anything excess about that, because that probably deserves its own context in its own right. If anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about there, just Google it and you'll find out. But people were like shitting on it 1 stars and stuff like that, and 2 stars. It's the worst film they've ever seen. And this person, and it never clicked with me until then. It probably had done, but never like consciously. It took him 20 years to make that film. He sold stuff, or he had the CGI crew on standby since the 90s, right? He's had 30 years to try and make it. He spent $200 million of his own money. Within 10 minutes of people leaving a 2-hour screening of an auditorium in Cannes, people were saying it's the worst thing they've ever seen. And he said, like, how can someone dictate that if it hasn't even had a lifespan yet? You don't know the context of it. You've just seen it. People are half asleep. And I thought to myself, I've done that. I've gone into a screening and with things and been like, this is a load of shit. I don't like this. And then you read about it afterwards and be like, oh, actually, that adds a bit more context to it. We can all do better reading. We can all do better at getting educated about cinema. But looking about older films and talking about the Blockbuster, there's just so much information to talk about, and it's so interesting to get that communication between us two. I love it, Jacob. I love anyone else on here. I find it fascinating to talk about films that have had that time, that have had a little bit of like, oh, this is interesting. We can talk about this and the influx of it. So your Blockbuster series is going to be fascinating, not just because of how you retaliate to it, but the generational thing we're going to see is going to be fucking fascinating because this is before both mine and your times. I'm fascinated when we get to the 90s and the early 2000s of my time and your time, because that's going to be like interesting to see how we saw that, the generation saw that, and the social issues of that as well. So you had a long-winded conversation here, granted, but this is fascinating to have documented. And I always say this, but I always mean it. Thank you very much for having me on, because I do love these conversations, and you know whoever listens to it, I'm not that bothered. I really am not. As long as I get to sit with you and talk to you about it, and hopefully you enjoy it. You think probably have to take a propanol after this. Be like, Jesus, like it goes on. But I just find this so interesting to talk about, and I'm genuinely really happy that you've taken the direction you've taken, because it's punishing, Carson. Like, it's fucking punishing to do what you were doing before.
Oh, I can. Yeah, I look now, and there's like people who've like films of 2024 ranked, and they have like 300 films on it, and it's like just these random garbage. Like, why would you watch? I don't know. Like,
I'll put that on. Yeah, I'll hide that list. Sorry.
you do watch some random shit, to be honest. But
Yeah, but
no, I mean, it's just like
look,
I don't know. I imagine like
if
as a kid going to the video store and just like imagine going to the VHS store, the Blockbuster, whatever your version of it was, but like and just watching the new release. Like there's a
mhm.
whole store. There's so much there. And especially when you get to like personally what affects you, what touches you, what speaks to you, like cinema is so rich and it's so valuable. And then also just I think the conversation. That's my favorite thing about ClapperCast is just like being able to have the conversation on these films. There'll be times, and I would love before I review a film, I love to have a ClapperCast on or something, because like just talking it through with friends who have these diverse perspectives and just getting into it. I just could not imagine like having this experience and then thinking, watching a film at Cannes, tweeting about it, and then just saying no Oscar prospects. I don't know how that is engaging with cinema in the same way. Like it just doesn't, that's not what I want out of it. And like when you quit trying to be like, I need to get the most likes or the most retweets. And this is like not to just jerk myself off completely here, but like when you actually have these conversations and you actually engage with cinema and celebrate it, it just becomes not even these individual films, but your understanding of film in general is so much more worthwhile. The fact that we had the Exorcist conversation with Exorcist Believer makes Jaws more worthwhile. There's ways where we had that Almodovar
Yes.
conversation that makes Jaws more valuable. Every conversation we're having is about this living world of film on this global level, and that's why I wanted to have these blockbusters in this series. One of the biggest reasons is then when we return to other film, it's gonna be make those conversations more worthwhile. Every conversation builds on top of each other. I just think like this is how cinema, in my opinion, should just be experienced and conversed about as much as possible. I love having these conversations, and it makes me appreciate cinema. It makes me appreciate Wes Ball so much more
Yes.
to sit there with Max and have a 2 hour
Yes.
conversation. And that film,
Yes.
even though that film I'm very mid on, I now have an appreciation and an understanding and a respect for that film. And I will be referencing that film as a film for a lot longer if I just went and saw it and then tweeted my reaction and moved on, you know? So
When I watch the cinema, I see it as a living, breathing entity, which I know people will be like, "Oh my god, it's a movie, get over it." But I think it's very important that people worked on that. It's an entity. It is a product. Don't get me wrong, but it evolves. It's not just a thing that comes out and it's like, oh, we can, it's just a one note. Things miraculously will evolve that film if it's contextual, subcontextual, societal, cultural. It doesn't matter; it will evolve. And I think someone was like, "Oh," because it was about Fury Road. Like someone brought like, "Oh, I used to work in a cinema when they watched that, and they got to watch it earlier, and they're like, it was worth watching it earlier, and then having to scrape sick or shit and food off the seats and stuff." So I was like, "Oh, this is the worst thing happened to film criticism." It's like, no, it's that person's personal experience, and like shitting on that is like the worst thing you can do. But like leaving Cannes and like just talking about it like to yourself is like, it's horrific to do. Because I've been to Cannes with Nick and I've been to Cannes with Venice, not together. We met there, not like we go everywhere together. But me and Nick would have a conversation after Venice and just talk and talk. And we did a podcast about it, horribly recorded, I'm sure. But we would just talk and talk and talk. And I remember when we watched the press screening for Dune and we came out and we would just having a conversation of it. And there was like 6, 7, 8 other people I never met, just Italians and some Swedes and some French, just talking there. Like, what do you think? And we're just having a conversation. Like, it's so stupid, but it is really like a really pleasant, emotionally fulfilling thing to talk about cinema. You know, me and you. I don't know about yourself, but I've done production and I've done film criticism and journalism. I've done both, and there needs to be a connection about them two together. And I think talking to Nick, who's a filmmaker, and especially when we spoke to Stephen the other week, which was brilliant to get a filmmaker's point of view on it. It's so important to have those dialogues and conversations as well, because their opinion on how a blockbuster is going to be widely different to ours as well. So it's good to have a dialogue as well. I was just gonna say, I did this win any Academy Awards?
Oh yeah, this one. Let me pull it up. It won 3. It won film editing, it won dramatic score, and it won sound. And it was also nominated for Best Picture.
Wow, that's another thing that we
So
not to. I could cry, so we don't need to go anymore. I don't want to keep you any longer, but that's another thing that I think we'll find a parallel conversation between the Academy Award and the blockbuster having a very interesting relationship as time goes on, because I think they sort of fall out of love, and I'm very interested to see where that starts and then picks up again, maybe, or just stops, because everyone you forget like gets nominated, like blockbusters for like VFX, sound design usually wins quite a lot, doesn't it? And I think costume, I think Black Panther and costume and stuff, um, and production design stuff, and usually sound editing wins. Um, but the best picture and the best leading actor and stuff like that, it's very rarely in the blockbuster gets considerable. So I'm eagerly anticipating that, where we come into it, where we become sentient within cinema, within these conversations.
yeah.
So I'm very excited. Can you reveal what's next?
Yeah, of course. So I was going to promote it at the end. So next episode, it's not going to be this. We're going to be reviewing The Watchers, which is Shyamalan's daughter's directorial debut. But then the week after that, we're back with Star Wars. So we're going in chronological order. So
Wow.
we're looking at the original Star Wars, which is a conversation I'm very interested in, considering my relationship to the franchise
Well,
is not the most positive, and I think you really like it. So we'll see. It'll be an interesting conversation. So with that, I think that's going to close our Jaws episode. A really, I think, great film to start this on, and a great conversation to set our minds as we head forward to the series all summer long, which I'm very, very excited for. Let's end this very quickly with how we normally do. Our question of the week this week is, what is our favorite non-Jaws shark film? So any shark film that is not Jaws or any of the sequels. I know you probably would have picked Jaws the Revenge, so I'm happy we didn't say that. Jack, what is your favorite shark film that is not
I,
Jaws?
like you, have a slight soft spot for this type of genre, and most of them are terrible. There are a few which I'll mention. I quite like the first 47 meters down. I actually watched this in a press screening. No, no, not a press screening, a preview screening in Chicago. I can't remember where. It was downtown, and they were like, someone was like, "Oh," and it was the same theater. I'm pretty sure it showed the uncut version of the house that Jack built and maybe dragged across concrete. It could have been. It could have been the Ebert and Siskel one. I don't know. It was a long time ago, almost 10 years ago now, and it was a bit different than the one uh, that eventually was released. I have a soft spot for that. I have a soft spot for Open Water, which frightens me to death. To death. But if I have to pick two, and I'm going to have to pick two because that's just the way it is, there are two I think I really, really do like. Another little heartwarming. I do quite like the Meg. I have a soft spot there. Okay, I have a soft spot. But genuinely, two which I think work for two different reasons, and ironically with the way that Jaws works, I think Deep Blue Sea gets the horror frightening to me as an early video watch release of that, and then getting on DVD and my childhood. Frightening to watch. That I have nightmares about the film still, especially with the shark with all its teeth and at the end, horrible. But one that showed just like the Jaws in that restrict it, but getting the tension is The Shallows. I don't think anyone expected The Shallows to do anything, and Jean Sarah, who's done a lot with Liam Neeson, I don't think anyone expected a Blake Lively Sharp movie to be as well equipped as that was, to understand the tension of the scenario, focus on character, but work on set piece, exemplify the limitations, and get the tension. And I think the two films are really good lineage of Jaws, in the fact that one gets the horror, gets the experience, and the other one gets the tension, gets the tone. So those would be my two. But there's I mean, I'm going to be shocked what you pick if you don't pick any decent ones, because there's a lot of shit on there, isn't there? There is that.
No, you mentioned.
Is it?
We'll go for it.
Isn't the one coming out next month about the one in France?
In
Yeah.
Paris, yeah. No, I was gonna mention I'm so excited for that one.
Oh god. Yeah.
I won't watch The Fall Guy, but I will be tuning in opening day to see
Yeah.
the Netflix film about the one swimming around Paris, because that sounds so dumb. But like, that's what I like about, like, if I just want dumb cinema, if you just want naturally like this is gonna be stupid, you have to just turn on a random shark one. Like, you have to. They're all dumb,
You haven't
like,
seen
super
Shark Night 3D yet, so you just
no,
hold
not.
yourself accountable for that. Because I watched that on, I've rented that on DVD when it came out wildly at Blockbuster, and that was a waste of my time. So I'd be very excited to see what you think about that, because that's that's crazy. Go on.
I will add it to my watch list. You mentioned the two I was gonna pick. The Shallows is genuinely like so well crafted and takes
Yes.
the ideology of Jaws. But then the other one is The Meg. I didn't love this on opening release, but rewatching, I think I rewatched it last year for the new one, which is shit, by the way. But it's so bombastic, big, loud. It is shows the shark, but the CGI is like genuinely quite incredible, I think, with it
Yeah.
on reflection. And it just keeps ramping up to where, like, if you want, it's super dumb, but like you want genuinely big blockbuster action fun, which is not a genre I always resonate with. I think The Meg is like a fantastic choice. I could watch that like with friends any day of the week and just have a great time. I think it's like actually quite underrated how good it is, in that sense. But those would be my two that spoke to me.
Yeah.
But
Isn't
a fun genre for
yeah?
sure.
Isn't Paul Price a massive fan of this genre as well?
Oh, I think so. I
I
don't think
think he is. I think like
I think
yeah.
so.
Um,
Um,
it's
yeah.
definitely a
I think it's just
yeah.
fun. Yeah. And with each one, you get the question of like, how are you going to do the shark? And so often, like, they have no budget, so it's like, I don't know. It's just, that's charming to me. There's something really charming to me about, like, in the right context, bad CGI or like really bad puppets. And like either way, I think with the shark films, you tend to get one or the other. So I appreciate it. With that, let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't talked about on the podcast. I have a few things. I watched Sasquatch Sunset, which I was super not into and disappointed by. I have a review on Clapper by this point. It's out, so I would check out my full review. I did see In a Violent Nature, which randomly you mentioned here. It reminds me in some ways of, I don't really know if you remember, I think Fantasia 2020. It was Crazy Samurai. I forget the last word, but the gimmick was most of the film was like this one take,
Yes.
one guy versus like 300. And it was a really interesting premise. And then you watch it and it's like, well, this is kind of boring. In a Violent Nature is an ambient horror film from the perspective of the serial killer. So imagine like it's Jason, it's Friday the 13th inspired heavily, but instead of jump scares where you're following the people he's killing, you follow him as he walks around, and then you'll hear voices. He'll walk up to a house slowly. He'll walk in there and he'll stab someone. And the kills are great. The practical effects are really, really impressive, I think. And it actually makes me sad for like the state of the slasher genre that we're not doing more practical stuff because we can do it so well. I think fans of the genre will really find reward in this, but I didn't necessarily think it was anything that incredible, especially with how it ends. I thought it was eh. And then for Cannes, I was not going to cover anything from Cannes. I didn't even ask for screeners, but Barbara sent me a bunch of stuff. So I did watch Universal Language, which I'm happy I did. This is very reminiscent of Wes Anderson, in like a Canadian Iranian style with inspirations of those cinema. pieces of cinema, and I just found this really warming. So if you can see Universal Language, I don't know when it will be released or where it will be released, but I do recommend at home you keep an eye out for it because I think it's worthwhile. And then my last thing I'll mention, didn't watch it this week, but I forgot to kind of mention we didn't really have a clear legacy segment for Jaws. It is worthwhile noting that this film like fucked over real life sharks and like led to like the mass murder of them, and like it's horrific actually. The documentary Playing with Sharks is on Disney Plus, I believe. I watched this a few years ago, but it's a really wonderful look at the impact that Jaws had on sharks. And it's actually about the woman who filmed some of the underwater scenes for sharks with the cage. They put a little person in a cage and like a little cage and made it to where the shark looked huge. It's a fascinating story there in general. But she got direct involvement with it, and her story and her trying to right the wrongs of Jaws, and, you know, fix the myth about sharks being super angry and aggressive because they're really not. So I would just recommend that documentary. Be educated on nature and be educated on what cinema does to nature because there is an effect. Jack, what are your reviews?
I can't remember if I spoke about these last week, but I don't think I did. So last week, I've watched about 5. I've not watched a lot, to be fair. I know that like 5. I watched the special edition 4K remastered cut of The Abyss. I remember I spoke to you about this off air, quite funny, about like an experience I watched the theatrical cut with, and I was like, I need to watch the Abyss this time, relatively sober, and there's 3/4 of a film there I think is outstanding, and then aliens turn up, and I just think one of like the Spielberg things that, which ironically enough, he sort of I give him a bit of shit for, is that he has this fascination, like the third act of highlighting lightness in an otherwise quite dark feature, and I mean tonally. And The Abyss is a film that works really well in tension about human characters in peril, and all of a sudden, you know, a fluorescent like whale turns up, and I'm just like, what have we done here? No wonder it didn't do very well, but it looked amazing as I can imagine. But I get 3/4 in after Michael Biehn has an escapade. I just check out, and there's an hour left. I'm like, Jesus wept. I watched the theatrical of Tombstone, which I thought was really good, if not very choppy in its narrative towards its ending. But considering the production history, like Jaws, how they managed to get away with that, Val Kilmer's outstanding in it. I did watch 2 new releases. I watched Late Night with the Devil. I'm still having to ponder a relationship with that film, because somewhere to me, and I'm glad I didn't have to review this because I really would have struggled, but if it wouldn't have said anything about itself, it'd have been such a far more rewarding experience. But it has to make mention of every single thing about why this is happening, what is happening here. Everybody just talks about, oh, it's shown about like Bohemian Grove, and I'm just like, why not have that just sprinkled in and out in snippets like they do with certain other characters in it, and have it be a slightly more thought-provoking, afterthought, subtextual conversation. And to me, it just really undermines the whole premise because it's not as frightening. I must admit that final 5-6 minutes are pretty good, but other than that, it was just so heavy-handed. However, Bane out of the Matrix Reloaded Revolutions, Ian Bliss is in it, and I was like, mate, I have missed you, because you like just don't even have to do anything and you take the screen. I did watch a film that you had mentioned, and you've mentioned it on this podcast, and I watched it because of that. Or was it you? Was it Chris Stuckman? It probably is both. Lisa Frankenstein.
Yeah, I've mentioned it.
Um, I read your review, and I very much agreed with you. I think you're a bit more generous than I. I quite liked its third act. To me, it felt lifeless. I know that's strange considering the context of its narrative, but Catherine Newton is like outstanding in it. Not giving Cole Sprouse a voice is like, well, fair play to you. And I think Zelda Williams, for what is essentially like a breakout movie, does a pretty adamant job with it. It felt like trying to be too much Heathers and too much Beetlejuice without an identity, flair, or soul, which I think is really weird to put. But when I'm watching it, I'm like, we're going for quite a dark tone here, and it's meant to be fun, but it's never funny, and it's meant to be entertaining, and it's never really entertaining, and it's never really poignant either. I just felt it was like very soulless, very strange. And then the two of us, which will be very quick, is I watched a film called The Supergrass, which is a British film which no one's ever seen. 51 people have seen it on Letterboxd. And then because of Uncut Gems, I listened to it and I go to work. I watched Time Cop based on their Jakob's 4.5-star review of it, and then I looked at Randy's. It was 3. I was like, Randy's a normal one. I'm not big in Jean-Claude Van Damme. I like Bruce Willis. I like Sylvester Stallone very rarely, but it was very much Bruce Willis. It was Arnie, and it was Stallone's like Demolition Man and shit like that. JCVD never, and Steven Seagal. They never did anything for me. So it's interesting to go back again, like we've done on here, and look at a film that is having a 30th anniversary this year, which is frightening, considered that's close to my birthday year anyway. But Peter Hyams as well, interesting director. I enjoyed it. I think it's interesting to watch something like that and especially watch a European centric actor try and get into a US market by being American, like Arnie did. I find it fascinating. I find the immigrant experience on cinema, especially within masculinity, fascinating. Because if you're not a monster in more ways than one, a 300-pound muscular dude who can do karate, or you literally played a monster, there isn't really a place for you in the blockbuster, or even within I'm not undermining myself here, but not necessarily like to blow up and to be extremely popular. So especially within like action movies anyway. But those are the films I've seen. I've not seen a lot. I'm very I don't really know what I'm going to watch next week because there's so much to watch. I promised I'd watch Iron Claw. I promised I'd watch Dogman because I need to review it for the site. But it's very difficult. I don't really want to pay for watching a Luc Besson film in 2024. So we'll see what'll go there. But I don't know. Like watching Unfrosted. Does that do anything for you? I don't know. Yeah, have you seen it?
No, of course not.
97 minutes. I don't think I can get anything back. Jean de Barry's playing in a cinema near me, the Johnny Depp thing, and I'm like, no, not really. I think I'm gonna wait for something coming out maybe tomorrow, and I'll see. But I'll probably go back to watching old movies. I'm gonna watch Crybaby, John Waters this week. I promised myself I would do.
Oh, hell yeah.
And then I'm gonna try maybe watch Multiple Maniacs to finish the filmography. But what a sad thing that is. Maybe I'll leave that like Tony Scott's Revenge. Maybe I'll just leave that one film and be like, I'll get to it, and then I'll have the filmography, and then I think I'm gonna watch the theatrical cut of Alexander, and then I'll be watching The Watchers. I think it comes out June 7th here, which is like, oh god.
Yeah. I don't know if I've not seen it, but I saw the TV Glow. I know Nick
Yes, I've
loved
heard
it,
good
and that's getting
reviews.
really good reviews. So if that comes out, I'd recommend it. Again, I've not seen it yet. I might go today. I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for joining us for this big start to our summer blockbuster series. Hey, blockbusters are big. These episodes might be a little bit bigger. Jack, where can we find you on social media?
Not that anyone would probably want to listen to me talk even more after this, but you can find me on Letterboxd with like loads of strange reviews with the username @Jak-Luke Sharp. It's just my full name. You can find me on X or on Twitter with the same. I don't really post a lot because that's a cesspool. But you can find me on Clapper with a review dropping of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes tomorrow. I say this every time. There's 3 features dropping, 2 Matrix ones, and a Psycho, Gus Van Sant's Psycho. I had to write about that. I had to write about that film. And then just a few more reviews. I've got Monkey Man to drop because I've seen that recently. But I'll leave it for next week. And just a few other bits, yeah. But you can find me on my voices there, and you can find me on ClapperCast as well, which I love doing with Carson. And when I have the time on Friday nights, Gems, which when it gets a bit more aggressive. This is calm before the storm.
Of course. You can find me on Twitter @BP_movie reviews, Letterboxd Carson Timar. Thank you so much for listening and joining us again. We'll be back next week for The Watchers, and then in 2 weeks, our summer of blockbusters continue with Star Wars. So thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.